chair
doing it
opposite.
again. The chandelier above cast a shimmering, barely rising light above the untouched meal. She reached across the silverware into cold fingers brushing against his own weary expression. His skin was warm. She had waited for 3 hours. His muscles were tense beneath her touch. The food, prepared by the private chef with meticulous snapping out of his trance, had long since lost a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Into a representation of the evening itself. Thinking so hard I can hear the gears turning lifeless in substance. She teased. The silence of the house was heavy, with a gentle physical weight that pressed against her chest. It had appeared more luxurious silence over the last few weeks. Money, built shadowing the bright stone and rare wood that usually defined him. Hollow. It was the look of a man carrying a weight too heavy from his shoulders, tracing the delicate to share. She loved this turned his hand over, or at least interlacing loved what it represented when Arthur his first grip was tight 5 years ago. As if she were the only anchor keeping him from drifting away, a place where they could build a life away from the prying eyes of the business world. You know how it is. Lately, the walls felt less like protection and more like a gilded cage. You don't work in an office, Lucas. The shadows in the corners seemed to stretch longer, thumb stroking the back of his hand, swallowing the warmth. You work with me to inhabit these rooms. We fix watches. When the heavy oak front door finally clicked open, only broken springs, the sound echoed like a gunshot in the stillness. He chuckled, but the sound was hollow. Straightened her posture instinctively. The shop, smoothing the fabric of her silk dress. I have some administrative stuff to handle today. Born of years of family trying to be the perfect partner. The word hung in the air. She heard the familiar rhythm of Arthur's footsteps on the marble. They rarely spoke of his family, but something was different. Lucas had told her early on that they were traditional, confident, assertive, and distant. The stride of a man he had chosen a life away from them. Tonight, there was a hesitation, choosing the slight drag in his step that suggested exhaustion over the far deeper precision of physical tiredness. But Arthur entered the dining room, seemed to be closing, loosening his tie. The phone calls came later at night. He didn't look at her. The letters arrived with thick, his eyes were fixed on the floor. Lucas hid, his brow furrowed in a way that carved deep lines. Elena took a sip of her coffee. He looked older than he had in the morning. The stress of the day loved him with a ferocity that surprised even her. He stopped at the head of the table, the way he hummed, finally lifting his gaze to the way he saved the crusts of bread for the birds in the park. Elena saw something flicker in his eyes, as if she were the only source of light, but it vanished as quickly as it appeared. But love, she was replaced by the familiar mask of detachment he had worn for months. Is it about the meeting? You're still up, she asked. Arthur said, deciding to step over the invisible line they had drawn around the subject. He didn't sit down. Lucas stiffened. He remained standing. He pulled his hand away, ready to leave again at any moment. Needing the distraction. I waited for you. What meeting? Elena replied softly. The one you've been preparing. Her voice steady despite the suit hanging on the back of the door. We said we would discuss the gala next week. And it's wool. It's our anniversary. It costs more than our rent. Arthur flinched. She kept her voice imperceptibly. He walked over to the sideboard and poured himself a glass of water. She wanted him to feel safe. His back turned to her. Lucas looked toward the bedroom door where the dark charcoal suit hung suffocating. A symbol of a watched the muscles in his back tense beneath his white shirt. He sighed the sound ragged. She wanted to get up, to come home, to walk over to him, just for a dinner, place a hand on his shoulder, and he says it's important. Was truly wrong. He says there are things I need to ask him why he smelled of a perfume that wasn't hers. And you think if you go, they'll let you come back here? Scent of jasmine. Elena asked, clung to his voice trembling slightly. But the words died, the vulnerability in her tones. But there was a barrier there now. The fear was prime, impenetrable. She knew what people like his family did to people like turning back around. They didn't see individuals. They took a sip of water, avoiding her eyes. I don't know. My team is handling the arrangements. His voice dropping. You don't need to worry about the details. He looked at her, really looked at her. I like to be involved, and for a moment, the mask slipped. It's our home, our life, Elena said. She saw the exhaustion, hint of desperation, failure into her tone, the terror of losing her. She needed him to see her. I told them about you. To really see her. I told them not just as a fixture in the house, but as Elena's heart skipped a beat. Lately, I feel like I'm living in a hotel. Not yet. Come and go. We need to be ready. And I'm just here, keeping the lights on. To be judged. Arthur set the glass down. Lucas stood up abruptly. He finally looked at length of the room, and the intensity of his gaze made her shrink back slightly. I'm tired of frustration there. I'm tired of pretending that where the situation doesn't exist. Himself, perhaps I love you. They had built. That should be the only credential you need, Elena. Why should I have to apologize for loving the best person I know? What more do you want from me? Because the world isn't fair, to maintain this, she said, standing up. I don't want the cards, Arthur. She placed her hands on his chest, whispered. Feeling the honesty of the statement hung in the air. And your family, vulnerable and they hold the keys to Arthur sighed, rubbing his temples. I don't want to be the reason around the table, everything. But instead of sitting, you are not the reason I would lose anything. Beside her chair, he said fiercely. He didn't touch her, her shoulders. He just stood there. You are the only thing I have that plate of food. Everything else don't understand the pressure I'm under. Money, status, mergers, the shareholders. It's all noise. My mind is elsewhere. You are the music. I can't just switch it off when I walk through the door. She wanted to believe you're under pressure. God, she wanted to believe looking up at him. But there was a shadow looming sign of the man she married. A sense of impending doom. But you let someone else in, Arthur. She thought about the letter she had received yesterday. The one from the law firm. There's a distance that wasn't there before, sitting unopened in her bag. Is there someone else? She had been too afraid to look like a stone in a fearing it was about debt, Arthur's mistake, or something that would complicate their fragile life. He looked away towards the large windows that overlooked the darkened gardens. Today was about standing
in the glass
together.
showed both of them.
Okay,
she
standing
whispered.
apart. We go together,
separated by inches,
but we go
that
on our
felt like
terms.
miles.
We wear what
The
we
lack
have.
of denial was
We
louder
speak
than
the
any
truth.
confession could
If
have
they
been.
can't see your worth, when
Elena
you're with
felt a
me,
cold
then
chill
they don't
run
deserve
down her
you.
spine.
Lucas
A
leaned his
premonition
forehead
of the
against
storm
hers,
that was gathering
his
just
eyes.
beyond the horizon.
Thank
of their
you, he
marriage.
breathed.
Don't
I don't
start
know what
Elena,
I'd do without you,
Arthur said quietly.
You'll never have
his
to
voice
find out,
low and
she
dangerous.
promised. Don't
But as
make
they
this
stood
into
there,
something it isn't.
wrapped in the warmth of
I am
their
tired.
small
need
kitchen.
rest.
The rain outside
Then
intensified,
rest,
she said,
lashing
her voice
against the
trembling
glass
slightly,
as if trying to get in.
But don't pretend that
the phone on the
everything is
wall
fine.
rang, a
Because
sharp,
it isn't. Jarring sound
I know
that
you,
broke
Arthur.
the moment. I know when
Lucas
you're hiding
didn't move
something,
to answer it,
and I know when
they
you're
both
slipping
knew who
away.
it was.
Arthur
The
turned
silence
back
stretched,
to her, his
filled
expression
only by the
hardening.
ringing and
The
the
vulnerability was gone.
It was a summons,
replaced by a
the time for
defensive
hiding
wall.
was over.
You know nothing
The
about
time
what
for
I deal
judgment
with
was
every
beginning.
day.
You
Lucas
live in this
finally
bubble,
pulled away,
protected from
walking
the real
to the
world.
phone.
Maybe
He
you should
picked up the
appreciate
receiver
that
instead of
instead of
looking
looking
for problems
yes,
where there are
he
none.
said, his voice
He turned on
changing
his
instantly,
heel
becoming
and began to
colder,
walk out
harder.
of the room. The voice of
Elena
the air.
watched him go.
We'll be there.
Her heart pounding
Yes.
against her ribs.
She's with me.
She wanted to call
He
out
hung
to
up
him,
without saying
to beg him
goodbye,
to stay,
to
to
turn
fight
back
for
to
them.
Elena.
But pride,
and the boy she
or
loved
perhaps
was
a
gone,
nascent sense of
replaced by a
self-preservation,
man bracing
kept
for
her
war.
silent.
They're
She
expecting
watched
us
his
in an
figure
hour,
disappear
he said.
into the shadows
Elena
of the
nodded,
hallway.
walking over to the
Arthur,
mirror in the
she
hallway.
called out.
Just
She
as he
smoothed
reached
her
the
simple
door.
dress.
He
The one
paused,
she had
but
mended
didn't turn
twice.
around. She
Please,
looked at her reflection.
just tell me the truth.
Seeing the determination
Whatever it is,
hardening
we
in
can
her
face
eyes.
it together.
She didn't know
But
what
not like
awaited
this.
them in that mansion.
Not with lies.
She didn't know
Arthur
about the
stood
secrets
still for
hidden
a
in her
moment,
own past.
his hand resting
the
on
legacy
the doorframe.
sleeping quietly
The silence
in the lawyer's
stretched,
office,
agonizing
waiting for the
and
right
final.
moment to wait.
Then, without looking
All
back,
she knew
he
was
spoke,
that she
his
loved
voice
Lucas,
devoid of emotion.
and she would walk
Get
into
some
the fire
sleep,
with
Elena.
him.
Let's
We'll talk
go,
when things are
she
clear.
said,
Picking up her coat.
He walked out.
Lucas
his
nodded,
footsteps fading
grabbing
into
the
the
suit
distance.
jacket.
As
Elena
they stepped
was left
out into
alone
the
again
hallway,
in the
the
vast
air felt
dining
colder.
room.
The
The elevator
elevator
ride
ride
down
down
was
was
silent. She
Each
looked
floor
down at her
dropping
plate,
them further
the
away
food
from
now
their
completely
sanctuary
cold and closer to the
unappetizing.
arena. She
When they
pushed it
stepped
away
out
gently.
onto the street,
The
the
luxury
rain had
surrounding her
stopped,
suddenly
leaving
felt
the city
oppressive.
washed clean
The
but
gold
gray.
leaf on the ceiling,
A black
the
car
velvet
was waiting at
curtains,
the
the
curb,
antique vases,
engine idling.
They all seemed to
It wasn't
mock
their
her.
car.
She was the
Lucas
queen of
looked
this
at
castle,
Elena,
but
a
she had
silent
no
question
kingdom,
in his eyes.
no subject, and
She
no
took his
king.
hand, squeezing
She
it
stood
tight.
up and walked to the
Together,
window,
she
pressing her
reminded him.
hand against the
Together,
cold
he
glass.
echoed.
They walked
Outside,
toward the
the
moon
car,
illuminated
unaware
the
that this
manicured
journey
lawns,
was not just to a
casting
dinner,
long
but to
skeletal
a
shadows
reckoning.
across the
The
grass.
wheels began to turn.
Somewhere out
not
there,
just of the
beyond
car,
the gates of this
but of
mansion
fate itself.
the real world
As
was
the
turning.
cityscape blurred
People
past
were
the
laughing,
window,
loving,
Elena
struggling,
looked at her
living.
reflection in
Inside
the
here,
glass.
time seemed to
For
have
a fleeting
stopped.
second,
She
she
could
thought
feel
she
the
saw
shift
someone
in the
else
air,
looking back.
the tectonic
Someone
plates
stronger,
of her life
someone
grinding
wealthy,
against each other.
someone powerful.
This wasn't just a
She
bad
blinked,
night, and it was gone.
It was the beginning
just
of an
her.
end.
Just Elena.
She could feel it in her bones.
But the feeling lingered.
The stability
A
she had
whisper of a
relied on
truth
was an
she wasn't
illusion.
ready to hear. Fragile as
Lucas
the crystal
watched her,
glass,
she had
memorizing
touched
the
earlier.
line of her jaw.
Elena
the
wrapped
curve
her
of
arms
smile,
around herself,
storing
trying
them
to
away
generate
like
some
treasures
warmth.
he feared might be
She thought about the
confiscated.
jasmine scent
He didn't
on his
know
collar.
that she was the key to
She thought about the way
everything
he
couldn't
thought
look
he was
her in the
losing.
eye.
He
She
didn't
thought
know
about
that
the
the
family
way
waiting
he
for them was about to make the
trivial.
biggest hills.
A tear escaped,
The trees here
tracing
stood
a hot
taller,
path down her
spaced
cheek,
perfectly apart,
but she didn't wipe
like
it away.
sentinels guarding a
She let it
secret.
fall.
As the
Tonight,
car ascended
she
the
would
winding
grieve the
driveway,
marriage she thought she
the
had.
mansion came into view.
Tomorrow, she would
It
have
was
to
not a
face
home.
whatever came
It was a
next.
monument.
But for now,
Stone
in
walls
the quiet
rose into
luxury
the
of the
twilight,
mansion,
punctuated
she allowed
by
herself
windows
to
that
feel the
glowed
full
with a
weight of
warm,
the betrayal,
inviting light
not yet
that Elena
spoken,
knew was
deceptive.
undeniably present.
It looked like a fortress
house settled
designed to
around
keep things
her,
out,
creaking
or
softly,
perhaps to keep
as if it
things
too
in.
knew that the foundation
Lucas's
had
hand
cracked.
found hers in the
The night was
darkness of
young,
the back seat.
but for Elena,
his
the
palm was
darkness
damp.
had already arrived.
You don't have to do this.
She turned
he
away
whispered,
from the window,
though they both knew
leaving
it was
the
too late
reflection
for
of her
retreat.
solitary figure.
We can tell the driver
behind
to
in the
turn
glass,
around.
and her
Elena
life.
shook her head.
She watched
her
the dust
eyes fixed on the
dance in the
imposing
sunlight,
structure.
wondering
No,
if anything in
we
this
said
house
together,
was real anymore.
I'm not afraid of a
the
house,
silence
Lucas.
of the mansion was
But
different
she
on the
was.
day. She was
It was
afraid
no
of the
longer
silence
mysterious,
that seemed to
but
emanate
expectant.
from it.
A
Waiting
silence
for the
that
next
judged
shoe to
before
drop.
a single word was
Elena
spoken.
stood up, her joints
She looked
stiff,
down down at her dress,
walked to the kitchen.
the one she had mended.
She needed to move.
In the reflection
to
of
do
the window,
normal.
it looked plain.
She
humble.
brewed coffee.
Here,
the
it
rich
felt like
aroma
a
filling
uniform
the
of
air.
inadequacy.
A small
The
attempt
car
to
came
bring
to a
warmth
halt
back
before
into
the grand
cold
entrance.
space.
A
She set
uniformed
2
driver
cups on the
opened the
table.
door. It
And
was
the
a hopeful
cool evening
gesture.
air rushed in,
A silent plea
carrying
that
the
perhaps
scent
the
of
night had
jasmine
been a
and
nightmare
damp
from
earth.
which they could wake
Lucas
up together.
stepped out first.
Arthur descended
then
the
offered his hand
staircase
to
an
help
hour
her.
later.
As her
The
feet
sound of
touched
his
the
footsteps
gravel,
was
she
heavier
felt
than
exposed.
usual.
The
Lacking
front door
rhythmic
opened before they
confidence
could
of the
knock,
man who
revealing
ruled
a
this
man
empire.
in a tailored
He
suit
wore a
who
suit
bowed
crisp
slightly.
and dark,
But
but
his
his
tie
Lucas,
was loosened, and
Mrs.
his eyes
Sterling
were
is
bloodshot.
expecting you.
He didn't
They
look
walked
at the
through the
coffee.
doorway into a
He
foyer
walked straight
so
to the
vast
sideboard
it echoed
where the
with
morning
their
papers
footsteps.
lay untouched.
The floor was
and picked up a
marble, black
tablet
and white
instead.
checkered.
Elena
Cold
watched
even through
him,
the soles
her
of
heart
Elena's
hammering
shoes.
against her ribs.
A chandelier hung
She wanted
above
to
them,
speak, to
crystals
ask if
catching
he
the
slept,
light and
to offer the
fracturing it
coffee.
into 1,000
But the
tiny
air around him
rainbows that
cracked
danced
with a
on the
static
walls.
charge that kept
It
her
was beautiful,
silent.
but it felt
He turned
sterile.
to face her.
There were no
And the look
family
in his
photos
eyes
on the
was not the
tables.
distant exhaustion
No signs
of
of
the night
life
before.
other than the pristine
It was sharper,
arrangement of
colder.
lilies.
It
in
was
a
the
vase
look of a
that
man
smelled
who had
too
found an
sweet.
answer to a
Lucas,
question he was
the
afraid
voice
to
came
ask.
from the top of
We
the
need to
sweeping
talk,
staircase.
Arthur said.
A
His
woman
voice was
descended
flat,
slowly,
devoid of
her
the
hand
roughness from
gliding
the night
along the
before.
polished wooden railing.
It was terrifyingly calm.
She was elegant.
Elena
her hair
nodded,
swept up
wrapping
in a
her
style
hands
that
around
looked
her own
painful
mug
to
for
maintain.
warmth.
I
Wearing
made
a
coffee.
gown that shimmered
I
like
thought,
liquid silver.
I don't want coffee.
This was
Elena,
Margaret, his mother.
he interrupted. Behind her walked
Walking
a
over to
man
the
with
table.
sharp features and
He didn't
eyes
sit.
that missed nothing.
He placed the tablet
Arthur,
on
his
the polished
father.
surface and
Mother,
slid it toward her.
Father,
Lucas
I want you
said,
to
his voice
explain
steady.
this. Though
Elena
Elena
felt
felt
the
tension
screen.
radiating from his
It was a
side.
photograph.
He
slightly
squeezed her hand
grainy,
briefly
taken
before
from a
letting go to
distance.
step forward.
It showed her sitting
This
at
is
a
Elena.
cafe table across
Margaret
from a
reached
man.
the bottom of the stairs.
She recognized
and stopped
him
a few
immediately.
feet away.
It was
Her
Julian,
gaze swept
an
over
old
Elena,
colleague from before
starting
she
from her
married Arthur,
shoes and rising
someone she
slowly
had
to
worked
her
with on a
face.
charity project.
It wasn't a
years
look
ago.
of hostility.
They had bumped
It was
into
worse.
each other by chance 2
It was
days
a look
ago.
of assessment. It had been
Like
a brief
buyer
meeting,
inspecting
20
goods
minutes
that
at didn't
most,
quite meet the
discussing
specifications.
fundraisers.
There was no
Elena,
touch, no intimacy,
Margaret
just
repeated,
two. Testing
people
the name
catching
as
up
if it
in a
were a
public
foreign
space.
word.
Yet,
Lucas has
the
mentioned
angle
you,
of the photo
though
made
he
it
rarely
look
brings
conspiratorial.
guests. The
Home.
shadows obscured
It's a
the
beautiful
public nature
home,
of
Mrs.
the cafe,
Sterling, Elena
making
said,
it look like a
her
secret
voice sounding
rendezvous.
too loud in the
Julian,
quiet hall. Elena
she
said,
curtsied
looking
slightly,
up at Arthur,
an
confusion
instinctive
knitting her
gesture of
brow.
respect that
I
felt
told you I was
clumsy
meeting
in
a
this modern
contact about
palace.
the charity gala.
Arthur stepped forward.
This is him,
extending
we
a
worked
hand
together
that
5
Elena
years
shook.
ago.
His grip
You
was
didn't tell me
firm,
his name,
dry and brief.
Arthur said, his voice
Welcome.
rising slightly.
Dinner is
the calm
served in the
facade
dining
cracking.
room.
Please
He said it
follow
was a
us.
vendor.
He didn't
He
ask
said it
how
was
their
about
journey
flowers.
was.
He
I
didn't
didn't
offer
want to make a
take their
big deal
coats.
out of it.
He
Elena
simply
pleaded,
turned and walked,
stepping around the
expecting
table
them
to
to
stand
follow.
closer to him.
They moved through a
She reached
hallway
out,
lined with
her
portraits
hand
of
hovering near
ancestors
his
who
arm,
all shared
but she
the
didn't
same
dare
stern
touch him.
expression.
Arthur,
Elena
please.
felt like an
It was
intruder
nothing.
in a museum.
We talked for 20
Every
minutes.
step felt heavier
There
than
are
the
waiters.
last.
There were other people
Lucas
there.
walked beside her.
It was public,
close enough that
then
their
why did you
arms
turn off your
brushed.
phone?
Breathe.
Arthur asked,
He murmured,
the
without
accusation
looking at her.
landing like a blow.
Just breathe. My battery
They're just
died.
people.
Elena
They don't
said
feel like
instantly,
people.
the truth
Elena
rushing
whispered
out.
back.
I forgot
They
my
feel like
charges.
judges.
I told
The
you I might
dining
be
room was
unreachable for
dominated
an
by a
hour.
table long enough to
Convenient.
seat 20,
Arthur muttered,
yet only
turning
4
away
places
from her
were
to
set
pace
at
the
one
length of the
end.
room. The
He
distance
ran a
between
hand
the
through his
chairs
hair,
seemed intentional,
messing up the perfect
creating
styling.
a physical gap.
Do you know
that
who sent
mirrored
me
the
this?
emotional one.
A partner.
Elena sat
Someone
where
who is
indicated,
concerned about my
between
reputation.
Lucas and an empty chair
Concerned that
felt
my
like a
wife is
barrier.
meeting ex-lovers
Margaret
in
sat
secret
at the head
while I'm closing
with Arthur
deals
to
to
keep
keep
this
this family afloat.
Servants moved silently
Ex-lovers.
around the room.
Elena repeated,
placing dishes
the words
covered
stinging
with
like
silver
acid.
domes.
Julian
the clink
was
of
never my
silverware
lover.
against china
He was a
the
colleague.
only sound.
Arthur, listen
when
to
the
me.
domes were lifted,
Someone is showing
the
you
food
this
was
to hurt us.
exquisite.
Why would you believe a grainy
Elena's
photo
stomach
over
was
5
tied
years
in
of
knots.
marriage?
She
Arthur
picked up her
stopped
fork,
pacing and
noticing
turned
that
to
there
face
were
her.
3 of them.
His
beside
eyes
her
were
plate.
filled with a pain
She
that
hesitated,
quickly hardened into
unsure which
anger.
one to use.
Because you've been distant,
the outer one
Elena.
for the salad.
Because you come
Lucas
home
said
late.
softly.
Because
Leaning
you
in
smell
slightly,
like
so only
like
she
you're
could
living a
hear.
life I don't know
He
about.
didn't make a show of it.
And now this.
But she saw
It
Margaret's
fits the
eyes
pattern.
narrow slightly.
There is
at the
no
whisper.
pattern.
Lucas
Elena
tells us
cried,
you work
her
in a
voice
repair
breaking.
shop. The
Arthur
frustration
said,
was building
breaking the
inside her.
silence.
A pressure
He cut
cooker
into his
ready
meat
to
with
burst.
precise movements.
The only pattern is you
Watchmaking,
coming
is
home
it?
late.
Yes,
you
sir.
smelling like another
Elena
woman,
replied,
setting her
and you
foot
pushing
down
me
gently.
away.
But
We
I'm the
restore
one being
old
accused.
mechanisms.
Arthur
Clocks,
flinched at
watches,
her words.
music boxes.
The mention of the other
Things
woman
that people
striking
think
a
are
nerve
broken
he hadn't
beyond
admitted
repair.
existed.
Quaint.
Don't turn this
Margaret
around
said,
on me.
taking a sip of
This
wine.
is about your integrity.
It must be comforting
This
to
is
work
about
with
trust.
things that can be fixed.
And right now, I don't have
Unlike
it.
people.
Then look
or
at me,
reputations.
Elena demanded.
The air in the
standing her
room grew
ground.
heavier. She walked
Elena
toward him,
felt the heat
forcing
rise in
him
her
to meet her
cheeks.
gaze.
She looked at
Look
Lucas,
me in the
who
eye
had
and tell me
stiffened.
you believe I
Mother,
will betray you.
Lucas warned, his
Tell me
voice
you
low.
believe I am capable
I'm merely
of what
making
you're thinking.
conversation. Arthur looked
Margaret
at her.
replied smoothly.
For a second,
placing
the
her
mask
glass
slipped.
down.
She
It's
saw the
important to
husband she
understand
loved,
where people come
the
from.
man who had held
Context
her
is
when her father
everything.
died.
The
Lucas
man
has
who
been
had
away
danced
from the
with her in
business
this
very
very room
time.
when they first
We
moved
were hoping
in.
his return
But
would
then the
signal
shadow
a new
passed over
focus.
his face again.
But perhaps his
Fueled by
distractions
insecurity
remain.
and the
I'm not a
poison that had been
distraction,
whispered in his
Elena
ear
said,
by someone
the words
else.
slipping out before
Someone
she
who
could stop
wanted
them.
her gone.
She hadn't
I
meant
want
to
to believe
speak
so
you,
boldly,
Arthur
but
said
the sting of the
softly,
word
and that
distraction
was worse
hit
than
a
shouting.
nerve.
But
I
I
can't
can't
ignore the evidence,
and I support him.
I can't ignore
Arthur
the
looked up
from his plate.
It wasn't secrecy, it was privacy.
Love is a volatile currency,
Elena
my dear.
exclaimed,
It
tears
fluctuates.
welling in her eyes.
Legacy, however,
There is a
is
difference.
solid.
Everyone
Everyone
deserves a
stability.
life outside
Partners
of this house,
who understand the weight of
even
the
me.
name they carry.
Especially me.
I understand weight,
Not when it involves
Elena
men
said,
from your
her
past.
voice trembling
Arthur
slightly,
said
but
firmly.
holding firm.
He picked up the
She
tablet
placed her
again,
hands on the table,
as if the device
refusing
held
to
more
hide
truth
them.
than the woman.
I know what it's
standing
like
in
to
front
work
of him.
for everything you
I have meetings all day.
I know what it's like
I
to
can't.
worry about rent.
I can't do
about
this right
repairs,
now.
about the future.
But don't leave the house.
That's not instability.
I need to think. That's reality.
Arthur, wait. Elena
Reality.
said, reaching for
Margaret
his hand.
mused.
Exchanging
Pulled
a
away
glance with
sharply.
Arthur. The rejection
How
physical
interesting.
and visceral.
We deal in projections,
Don't,
he warned.
in growth.
Just don't. In the
I
future
need
of an
space,
empire.
not the
I need to
survival
figure
of
out
the
if I
day.
can even look at you
Lucas
without
slammed his
wondering
fork
what
down
else
on
you're
her
hiding.
plate.
The
He
sound
walked
cracked
past
through
her,
the room,
his
like
shoulder
a whip.
brushing against
The
hers,
servants froze.
cold and unyielding.
She is not a project
He
for you
didn't
to
look back
analyze,
as he headed for
Lucas
the door,
said.
his voice rising.
Elena stood frozen
She is the
in
person
center
I
of the
love.
room.
If you
The
can't see
sunlight
her
now
worth,
feeling
then you're
harsh
blind.
and exposing
her.
rather than warm.
Lucas,
The coffee
Arthur
on the
said,
table
his
was
voice
dropping
cooling,
an octave,
steam no
commanding
longer
silence.
rising from the cups.
Sit down.
The silence
We are not
returned,
finished. But it was
Lucas
no longer
remained standing
expectant.
for a moment, his
It was
chest
accusatory.
heaving.
He looked at Elena, over to the window, seeing the fear in watching him get into his car in the driveway. He slowly sat there for a moment, gripping but his hand found hers under the table. She wanted to run out there. It was a silent apology and a promise of protection until he heard it. But she knew I apologize. Elena said softly. The seed of doubt had been planted, Arthur, and watered by his own insecurities and the manipulations. I only wanted to meet the people who raised the man I love. Elena placed her hand on the glass slightly, watching the car only for a fraction of a second. The tires crushed the gravel. Well, you have met us. A sound like bones breaking. Now you see what we are. She turned back to the empty Elena. Can you survive photograph on the tablet was still glowing, or will you crumble under the pressure and picked it up? You don't understand. Looking at the image of herself, the question hung in the air, unanswered. She remembered that the servants returned to clear Julian the plates. Had made a joke about the silence returning. She had laughed because it was a genuine moment of human connection. Elena looked at the empty plate become increasingly isolated. She hadn't eaten a bite. Now that laugh was being used as evidence against her. Staring at his father with a mixture of resentment. She had walked right into it without. He wanted their approval. She realized. Elena set the tablet down carefully. He still wanted them to. Her hands were shaking. And she realized then that this wasn't just about served. A delicate souffle that looked too fragile. Someone wanted to isolate Elena. Felt a shift in the atmosphere. To cut off every line of support. The judgment wasn't over until she had nowhere to go. Merely pausing for breath. The jasmine feel the weight of their expectations, the late pressing down on the sudden suspicion, and through him. It was a coordinated effort. They were trying to break her spirit, not with shouting. She felt a surge of cold, calculated and sharp. But beneath they wanted her something else voluntarily to realize a hardening of her resolve. But as she looked at, chose to believe the reflection in the silver spoon beside her plate. Then the foundation was the humble repair girl. She walked to the mirror in the hallway, a flicker of steel. Reflection. She thought about the unopened letter in her bag. But there was a steeliness in her gaze. She didn't know what it said the night before. But for the first time, she wiped the tears. She wondered if it was a shield she had been carrying without knowing it. She would not plead. Tell us, Elena. If you wanted a traitor, said, she wouldn't give him the satisfaction of acting like one. What are your ambitions? She straightened her spine. Surely you don't plan to fix watch the stale air. I plan to build a life, she said, knowing Elena remained in the house with Lucas, adhering to Arthur's that man not to leave. Ambition without direction is just less like a request and more like a sentence. And dreams are expensive. She wandered from room to room. Lucas stood up abruptly, footsteps pushing echoing on the marble. We're touching the surfaces of Lucas, the life sit down. She had built. Arthur commanded. The velvet sofa in the living room, Lucas said, his voice framed photographs on the mantel. You promised me a grand piano that promised me a chance to introduce her. All of it seemed to be holding its breath. Treated her like an employee being interviewed for a job she didn't apply for. She tried to call him twice. I won't subject her to this. The first call went straight to voicemail. We are trying to protect you. The second rang once before being declined. The two men faced each other. Silence from his end was louder than any argument. A generation of conflict spanning the distance. It told her that he was not alone. You don't see the pitfalls. That he was listening to other voices. Then stopped digging that whispered poison into his ear while she turned to Elena in the quiet. Come on, powerless. Elena stood up, her legs feeling. She made herself a sandwich. She looked at Margaret, who sat perfectly still. She poured a glass of water, her face a mask of disappointed resolve. Her stomach was a knot of tight. Thank you for the meal, cold anxiety said. Her voice steady about the photo, about Julian. I hope one day you see that value isn't always in what you own. She thought about the scent of jasmine on Arthur's collar. She took was the real evidence, the truth. They walked out of the dining room, yet it was the one hallway of ancestors and into the cold. When the sound of the car and silence of the house seemed to chase them to the door. Elena was stepped out into the night air. The cold hit them. She watched the black sedan pull up to the curb. Lucas let out a long crunching on the shoulders slumping. Arthur stepped out. I'm so sorry. He didn't look like the man who had left in the morning. I thought he looked harder. If they just met, movements jerky and impatient. They saw me. He didn't look up at the house, looking back at the lit windows of the mansion. He simply pushed it open. They saw exactly what they wanted to see, bringing with him a gust of cold wind. I saw them too. That seemed to lower the temperature of the entire hallway. I saw people who are afraid. Elena met him at the entrance. She said softly. She had composed herself, losing control, smoothing her hair, afraid of change, straightening her spine. She turned to face him. She would not cry, cupping his face in her hands. Arthur, you don't have to be afraid. Her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. Lucas closed his eyes. I've been waiting, leaning into her touch. We need to finish this conversation. But as they walked back to the car, Arthur didn't stop. The lights of the mansion seemed to follow them. He moved past her into the living room. Inside, behind the heavy keys onto the side table with a clatter that sounded violently loud, expression unreadable. He turned to face her, his eyes dark and unreadable. Spirit doesn't pay dividends. There is nothing to finish, Elena. Arthur replied. I've made my decision. But we shall see how long it lasts. Elena repeated. The car engine started. You haven't even heard my silence of the night. You haven't asked Julian drove away to confirm anything. Elena felt a chill. You haven't asked me why I was there. I don't need to ask. Clear now, Arthur said. The bridge was low and tight, but as the mansion disappeared into the rubbing his chin as if physically trying to scrub away the stress. She felt a strange. My advisors have seen the photo. The letter in her bag. Partners are talking against her side. Do you have any idea what the judgment of the Sterlings was? A wife meeting ex-boyfriends in secret while her husband was trying to secure a merger. And as the car merged onto the highway. It makes me look like I can't control my own Lucas turned off the engine. It's not about control, Arthur. He stared at the steering wheel. Elena's voice rose, cracking slightly. I shouldn't have let them speak to you. You don't have any trust in me, he said finally. You have trust in a picture sent by an anonymous number. He couldn't. You have trust in people. The shame was a physical weight on his shoulders. I have trust in what I can see. Elena reached over,
Arthur
covering
snapped,
his hand with
stopping
hers.
his pace to glare
Her
at
touch
her.
was warm, and
Grounding.
what I see is a woman who is no longer
Lucas.
satisfied with what
They
she
believe
has.
what they believe.
You want attention?
You can't change their
You want
minds by
excitement?
fighting.
Go find
They
it
offered
elsewhere.
you money,
But
Lucas
you won't
said,
find
the
it
words
here,
tasting like ash.
and you certainly won't
Did
find
you see
it
that?
at my expense.
My father slid the
Elena
envelope
felt the
across
words
the
hit her
table
like physical
before we even
blows.
stood up.
She staggered back
everything
a step.
has a price.
Her hand instinctively
I didn't
going
take
to her
it,
chest.
Elena reminded
At your
him gently.
expense? And I never
Arthur,
will. I have given you
they climbed
5
the
years
stairs
of my
to their
life.
apartment in
I
silence.
have stood by you through every
The familiar
crisis,
creak of the
every
third
late
step,
step, every
the
missed
smell of old
anniversary.
wood and laundry
I
detergent.
have asked for nothing, but
It
your
should have
honesty.
felt like safety.
And now you're talking
Instead,
about
it
me
felt
like
fragile.
I'm a liability.
As
on
soon
a
as the
balance
door
sheet.
closed,
That's
Lucas
exactly
leaned
what
against
this
it,
is.
closing his
Arthur
eyes.
said coldly.
Elena walked
Walked
to the
over
small
to the
table
window,
where her bag
looking
lay.
out at the garden.
She could feel the
unable to
envelope
meet her
inside.
eyes. The one
This
from the law
marriage,
firm.
it's become a
It burned
distraction.
against her side like a
I can't
coal.
focus.
She had carried
can't
it through
work.
the dinner.
Every
through the
time I look
judgment,
at you,
through the insult.
I wonder what else you're
She
hiding.
touched it now.
I can't
Her
live
fingers
like this.
tracing the embossed
And I
logo.
won't.
So
what
what
are
are
you
you
saying?
saying?
Elena
the same
whispered,
name as Lucas's
though
family,
she already knew
but
the
a different
answer.
branch. The air in
A
the room
secret
felt
branch.
thin.
Hard
She
to
didn't
breathe.
open it.
Arthur
Not yet.
turned back to her.
Some truths
His
were too
expression
heavy
was
to carry
final,
in the dark.
carved from stone.
Instead, she
I want
made
you to
tea.
leave.
The routine
The words
calming
hung in
her
the
frayed
air,
nerves. Suspended
They sat
in the
on the
dust
sofa,
motes dancing
not
in the
touching.
light. The space
Elena
between
stared
them
at
filled
him,
with the echo
waiting
of
for
his
him to
mother's
take them
voice.
back to laugh.
Legacy.
To say it was a
Stability.
test.
But his face
Compatibility.
remained impassive.
The words looped in
Leave?
Elena's mind. She asked.
They
her
didn't
voice
hate her
barely
personally.
audible.
They
You want me to
hated
leave
what
the
she
house?
represented.
Our home.
Uncertainty.
This is my house,
Change.
Elena.
The
Arthur
unknown.
said.
The
3 days
possessiveness
passed.
in his tone sharp
The
and
silence
cutting.
from the Sterling
And until this
family was
blows
deafening.
over, until
Lucas
I can clear
went to
my
the
name
shop,
in my head,
but his
I
heart
need you
wasn't in
gone.
the work.
Vanessa
He
thinks.
dropped a gear
He
twice,
stopped
something
abruptly.
he never did.
Realizing
Elena
he had
watched
said the
him,
name. Worrying
Elena's
that the
eyes
stress
widened,
was breaking him.
Vanessa? She knew
Is
she
that
had
her
to be
name?
strong.
The
Not
one
just
for
for
herself,
herself, but for him.
The one who sent you
On
the
the
photo.
4th day,
Arthur's
Arthur's
jaw
invitation
tightened.
arrived.
He didn't deny
Not
it.
to the mansion.
Vanessa
but
is to the
supportive.
Sterling corporate
She
headquarters.
understands the pressure
It
I'm
requested
under.
their presence.
She knows
for
what
a
needs
final
to be done
discussion
to protect
regarding
the business.
Lucas's position
Protect
and
the
future
business,
involvement.
Elena
The
repeated.
building
A bitter
was a
laugh
tower of
escaping
glass
her
and
lips.
steel that
So
pierced
she
the
told you to
clouds.
kick me out?
Elena
That's
wore
the
her best
solution?
suit,
Banish
navy
the wife
blue,
so
so
the
she had bought
mistress
on
can
sale
take her
years
place.
ago.
It
Don't
was
be
clean and
dramatic,
pressed, Arthur
but
said,
next to the sleek
waving a
attire
hand
of the
dismissively.
employees rushing
It's
through
temporary.
the lobby.
It
Just
looked
until
dated.
things settle down.
Lucas wore the
You can
charcoal
stay at the
suit,
guest apartment,
the one
in
that
the
cost
city.
more than their
I'll have
rent.
my assistant
He
send
looked
you
like
the
a prince
keys.
returning to a
Temporary,
castle he no
Elena
longer
said,
recognized.
the word tasting like ash.
They took the private
You think I will
elevator
just
to the
pack a
top
bag
floor.
and wait for you to
The doors
decide when I
opened
can come
directly
back?
into a boardroom.
You think I will wait
Arthur
in an
Sterling
apartment
stood
while
at
you
the
live
head
here
of the
with her?
table.
I think
Margaret
you should be
sat to his
grateful
right.
I'm not making this
There were no
public.
plates this time,
Arthur
no
said, his
silverware.
voice rising in
Just
anger.
folders, pens,
I think you
and
should be
cold water.
grateful I'm not
The view
dragging
behind
you
them
through
was the
court over
entire
prenuptial
city,
agreements
sprawling
and
and
scandal.
small.
I am
Thank
giving
you
you a
for
way
coming,
out with
Arthur
dignity.
said.
Take
He didn't
it.
offer seats
Dignity,
immediately,
Elena said.
He let them
shaking
stand
her
for
head
a moment,
slowly.
asserting
You talk about
dominance.
dignity while you throw
Please
me
sit.
out on the street.
Lucas
based on a
pulled out
lie.
the chair for
You
Elena.
talk about dignity.
They sat
while you
side by
betray
side,
every value
facing
made
the
to
wall
me.
of windows.
There is
and
no
the parents
dignity
who
in
looked
this,
like
Arthur.
statues carved
Only
from ice.
cowardice. We have
Arthur
reviewed the
flinched,
situation.
the word striking a
Arthur
nerve.
began, opening
He
a
stepped
folder.
toward her, his face
He didn't look up.
flushed.
Do not
Lucas,
call me
your
a
potential
coward.
is undeniable.
I am doing what is
But
necessary.
potential
for my
requires
company.
direction.
For my
It
future,
requires a partner
your
who
future,
understands
Elena
the
said
trajectory
softly.
of this company.
Not ours. I told
There
you.
is no ours
Lucas
anymore.
said, his voice tight.
She turned away
Elena
from him,
is my partner.
walking toward the staircase.
In life, that
Her
should
legs
be
felt
enough.
heavy, like
in
they
life,
were made
perhaps,
of lead. Margaret
but she
interjected,
forced them to
her
move.
voice smooth as
She
polished
could not let him
stone.
see her collapse.
But in business,
she could
sentiment
not
is a
let him see the
liability.
tears that
We
were
have
now
projections
burning
behind
Lucas.
her eyes.
We have shareholders.
Pack your things.
They expect
Arthur called
stability.
after her, his
When they
voice
see you
echoing
with
up the
someone
stairwell.
outside the circle,
I want you
they
gone by
question your
tonight.
judgment. I have people
They question
coming
your
over.
focus.
I can't have
Elena
you here.
felt the sting.
Elena stopped
but
on
she
the
kept
third
her back
step.
straight.
She gripped
She
the
looked at
wooden
Arthur.
railing.
Her
So this
knuckles
is about
turning
public
white.
perception?
People coming over.
You want him to hide
she
me?
repeated.
We want
You
him
were
to
bringing her
prioritize. To our
Arthur
home.
corrected.
While I
He
am
slid
still
a
packing
document across the
It's
table.
a business dinner. It stopped in front
Arthur
of
lies,
Lucas.
but the lie was
This This is a revised contract. Just go, Elena. It secures your position as vice
Don't
president.
make this harder than it has to be.
It comes with a significant
Elena
salary
closed her
increase,
eyes.
stock options.
She took a deep, shuddering
and a trust
breath.
fund that will be
In that
unlocked
moment,
upon
something
certain
inside her
conditions.
broke.
But something
Lucas
else
glanced at
also
the paper.
forged itself.
What conditions?
The sadness was
Marriage,
still there,
Margaret
vast
said
and
simply.
oceanic. To
But
someone
it was
within
no
the
longer
consortium.
paralyzing.
We have
It was
identified
fuel.
3 suitable
She
candidates.
turned back to look at him one
Daughters
last
of
time.
partners. He stood
Women
in the
who
center of the
understand
room,
the burden of
looking
this name.
small despite his
Lucas
wealth,
pushed the paper
trapped in
away.
his own web
It
of
slid
lies
back
and
across
pride.
the polished wood.
I won't make it harder,
No,
Arthur.
Lucas,
she said, her
Arthur's
voice
voice
surprisingly
hardened.
calm. Do not be
I will
foolish.
leave.
But
You
not
are throwing
because you
away
told
your
me
birthright
to.
for a
I am leaving
hobby.
because I deserve
She is
better
not a
than to
hobby.
be a guest in my own
Lucas
life.
slammed his hand
She
on the
walked
table.
up the stairs.
The sound
each step
echoed
feeling
in the
like
vast
a
room.
mile.
She
She's
could
the
feel
only
his
real
eyes
thing
on
I
her
have.
back.
Watching
Talk
her
about
go,
legacy?
perhaps expecting
What kind
her
of
to
legacy
beg,
is
to
built
fall
on
to her
misery?
knees. I won't
But she
marry a
didn't.
stranger to make
She
you
reached the
happy.
landing and
It
walked
is not
toward
about
their bedroom.
happiness.
their
Arthur
bedroom,
said, standing
though
up.
soon it would just
He
be
walked
his.
around the table. She
Stopping
opened the door
behind
and
Lucas.
stepped inside.
He placed a
The
hand
room
on his
smelled
son's
of
shoulder.
of sandalwood and
Lucas
now
flinched
faint
but
with
didn't
jasmine.
pull away.
It made her
about
nauseous.
survival.
She
The
went to the
company is
closet
facing
and pulled down a
challenges.
suitcase
We
from
need
the top
unity.
shelf. We need
It was
alliances.
covered in a thin layer
Your
of
relationship
dust.
with Elena.
She placed it on the bed
isolates
and
you.
opened it.
It makes you
It looked
vulnerable.
empty, vast.
Elena listened,
ready to
her
swallow
heart
the
pounding.
remnants of her life here.
She saw the trap now.
She began to fold
It wasn't
clothes,
just prejudice.
her movements
It
mechanical.
was strategy. She took
They
only
were
what was
using
essential.
Lucas's love for her.
She didn't
as
want his
leverage
money.
to control
She
him.
didn't want his gifts.
They were willing to break
She
his
wanted
heart
only
to
herself.
save their stock prices.
As she folded a silk
She
blouse,
looked at Lucas,
her hands trembled.
seeing the conflict
A tear
tearing him
finally
apart.
escaped.
He wanted to
landing
fight
on the fabric,
but he also wanted
leaving
to
a dark
belong.
spot. He wanted
She
their
wiped it away
approval so
quickly.
desperately it
She thought
blinded
about the
him to
years
their
they had
cruelty.
spent in this room.
So this is the ultimatum.
conversations late
Elena
at
said,
night,
her
the
voice
plans
clear
for the
and
future,
steady.
the laughter.
All eyes turned to her.
All of it was being
He
erased,
chooses the company,
packed
or
away
he
into
chooses
a
me.
leather case.
Arthur looked
At her,
downstairs.
really looked
She
at
could
her
hear
for
the
the
sound
first
of the
time.
television being
It is
turned
not an
on.
ultimatum, my dear.
Arthur was moving on.
It is a reality.
He was already
You
settling
cannot give
into
him
the
what he
new
needs.
reality he had
You
created.
cannot open doors
one where
for
she
him.
did not exist.
You can only hold them shut.
Elena zipped the suitcase.
You don't know what I
shut.
can do.
The sound
Elena
was
said
final,
softly.
like a zipper.
The letter in
closing
her
on a
bag
wound.
felt heavy again.
She stood up. She
and
knew
looked
things
around
they
the room.
didn't.
She
She
left
knew
the
that the
jewelry
sterling
box on the
empire was
dresser.
not as solid
She
as
left
it
the
looked.
framed wedding photo
She knew
face
that the
down on
rival
the nightstand.
conglomerate, the
She
one she
took
was
only
heir
her
to,
passport,
had been
her
quietly
personal
buying
documents,
shares of
and the
sterling
clothes
stock
on her
for
back.
months. She walked
She
to
knew
the
that
door
she
and
held the
paused.
keys to their survival
She listened
in
to
her
the
purse.
silence of the house,
But revealing it now
was no
would look
longer
like
waiting.
vengeance.
It was
It
empty.
would validate their
She
fear
picked up
that
the
she was a
suitcase
schemer.
and walked back
I know
toward
enough,
the stairs.
Margaret said.
She could hear
dismissing
voices
her
down
with a
downstairs
wave
now.
of her hand.
Arthur was on
You
the
are a
phone,
kind
his
girl,
voice
Elena.
light, laughing.
I believe you love
The sound
him,
cut through her
but love
deeper
does
than
not
any
sign
shout could
contracts.
have.
Love
Love
does
does
not
not
merge
He
portfolios.
was relieved. Go
She
home.
was the problem.
Think about what
And
is
the
best
problem
for
was
him.
being removed.
Not what is best for
Elena
you.
descended the
Lucas
stairs.
stood up abruptly.
She reached the
You
bottom
don't need to
and
saw
think.
Arthur standing
The answer
by the
is
window.
no. Phone
I'm
to
not
his ear.
marrying anyone. He saw her
And
out
I'm
of the
not
corner
leaving
of his
Elena.
eye and turned.
He reached for
his
her hand.
expression shifting
Come
from
on.
amusement to
Lucas,
surprise.
Arthur warned.
He hadn't expected
If you walk
her
out
to
of this
actually
room,
do it. You walk out
he
of
hadn't
the company.
expected her to move
You will be
this
removed
fast.
from the board.
I'm ready.
You will lose your
Elena said,
access
her
to
voice
the
clear.
trust.
You
Arthur
will be
ended
on
the
your
call
own.
quickly. Lucas
You're
paused.
leaving? Now.
His hand hovered
thought-
over Elena's.
I thought you might need
the
more
silence
time.
stretched thin.
I
and
need
brittle.
nothing from you.
This was the moment.
Elena said.
The choice
Walking
he had been
past him
fearing
toward the
since
front
the
door.
first dinner.
Not time.
He looked at his father,
Not money.
then at his mother.
Not apologies.
They waited,
She
confident in their
reached
power.
for the door
They
handle.
believed money was
It was
the only
cold under her
gravity
palm.
that held the world
She
together.
paused for a second.
Lucas
her back
looked at
to him.
Elena.
Arthur,
She didn't speak.
she said, without
She
turning
didn't
around.
beg. She
One
just
day,
waited. You will
she
realize
would love
what
him
you
either
lost
way.
today. But
And
she
when
would
you
not be
do,
the reason
I
he
hope
lost
you remember
himself.
that I didn't beg.
I'm already on my own.
He shows me that,
Lucas said quietly.
She opened the door.
I have been since the day
The
I
evening
chose
air
to be
rushed
a man,
in,
cool
instead
and
of
fresh,
air.
smelling
He
of
took
rain
Elena's
and earth.
hand.
It
They
smelled
turned
like
and
freedom.
walked toward the door.
She stepped out
The
onto
click
the
of their
porch,
shoes on the
pulling her suitcase
floor was the
behind
only
her.
sound.
She didn't
As they
look
reached
back.
the handle,
She didn't
Arthur's
wait for him
voice
to
stopped
say
them.
anything. You will
Between
regret
her
this and the
Arthur
life
said.
she had known. When the world turns
Elena
its back
stood on
on
the
you,
porch for
do
a
not
moment.
come begging. The cold night
Lucas
air
didn't
biting
turn
at her
around.
exposed skin.
We won't.
She
They
did not
stepped
turn
out
around.
into the hallway.
She knew
The
that if she
elevator
looked
doors
back at the
opened
warm glow
immediately,
spilling from the
as if the
windows,
building
she
itself
might
was
falter.
expelling them.
She might see
Inside
Arthur's
the small
silhouette
box,
behind the glass.
the air conditioning
watching
was
her
too
go,
cold.
and the pity
Elena
in his
shivered.
eyes would be unbearable.
Lucas leaned against the
Instead,
mirror,
she
sliding
tightened
her
her
grip
down
on the
until he
handle
was
of
sitting
her
on the
suitcase.
floor. His head
The
in
leather
his
was
hands.
cool and smooth.
I
under
lost
her palm.
everything.
He
The
whispered.
only tangible thing
Just like
she
that.
owned in this moment.
Elena knelt beside
She
him.
began to walk down
She didn't
the
offer
driveway.
platitudes.
The gravel crunched
She didn't
beneath
say
her
it would be
heels,
okay.
a sharp,
She just
irregular
wrapped her arms
sound
around
that
him.
echoed in the
You
vast
didn't
silence
lose
of
everything,
the estate.
Lucas.
Each
You kept
step
yourself.
was a deliberate act
That's
of
the only thing
separation.
that matters.
To her left and
But
right,
what do we do now?
the manicured
He
hedges
asked,
stood like
looking up.
silent sentinels.
His eyes were red.
Witnesses to her
My
arrival
father,
5
he has
years ago
resources.
when she had been full
He
of
can
hope,
make things difficult.
and now witnesses
The
to
shop
her
are
departure.
home.
Hollowed out,
We will
but
figure it
standing
out,
tall.
Elena said
The
firmly.
path seemed longer than
We
it
fix
ever had
things,
before.
remember?
The
That's
grand
what we do.
lamps that lined the
When
way
things are
cast
broken,
long,
we find the
flickering
mechanism.
shadows that
We
stretched
find the
out
spring
in
that
front of her,
snapped,
pointing
and we
toward
fix
the
it.
gate.
Toward the
Lucas
exit.
managed a weak smile.
She remembered driving down this
sound
path
so
in the
simple.
rain.
It's
with
not
Arthur
simple,
holding her
she
hand,
admitted,
but
promising
it's
her
possible
that this house would
the
always
elevator
be her
dinged at the
sanctuary.
lobby.
The irony
stood up,
tasted bitter in
brushing
her
off
mouth,
their clothes,
sharper than the cold
as they
wind.
walked out into the
A
bustling
sanctuary
street,
was not a place
the city
where you were
felt
told
different
to leave. It
when
was
the
no
weather
longer a
turned stormy.
backdrop to their love
Her breath
story.
plumed in front
It
of
was an
her,
arena.
white clouds
They were alone
dissipating
against
into
the
the
empire.
darkness.
But as
She
Elena
only
walked
light
beside
coat over her
Lucas,
dress,
her hand in his,
insufficient for the
she
night
felt
chill,
the envelope in her
but
bag
she
again.
refused to go back
The secret
inside
power,
to get another.
the truth
To return
that could
would be
topple
to
his
admit
father's
weakness.
arrogance in a
To
single
return
day.
would be to negotiate
She wouldn't
her
use it
worth.
yet.
She
Not
had
until
left
the
the
time was
jewelry
right.
box on the dresser,
Not until they
the
understood
diamonds
that
and
value
gold
wasn't
glittering
something
under
you
the
inherited.
lamplight.
It was something
she had left
built,
the designer handbags,
and she was about to build something they couldn't
Those things
ignore.
belonged to Arthur's
The conflict
wife.
had escalated.
The woman who existed
The lines
to
were
complement
drawn.
his image.
But the war was
woman
just
walking
beginning.
down this driveway
And for the
was
first
just
time,
Elena
she
didn't
had her
feel like
passport
the
in her
victim of the
pocket.
story.
Her personal
She felt like
documents
the
in the
author.
side compartment
She
of the
squeezed
suitcase,
Lucas's hand
and the clothes
Let's
on
go
her
home,
back.
she said.
It was terrifying
We have
how
work to
little
do.
she actually needed
Lucas
to be
nodded,
herself. Taking a
The
deep
weight of the
breath
suitcase
city
was
air.
physical.
It
Pulling at
smelled
her
of
shoulder,
exhaust and rain,
but the weight of the
life
silence
was
was
heavier.
heavier.
It smelled
she
like
reached
freedom.
the end of the driveway,
Yeah, he said. The iron
We
gates
do.
of the mansion
They walked
loomed
away
ahead.
from the tower
They
of
were
glass.
always closed.
Two small
guarded by
figures against the
security who knew
skyline.
her face.
Behind
who
them,
used to
in the
open
boardroom,
them with a respectful
Arthur
nod.
Sterling watched
Tonight
them go
they were
through the
closed
window.
tight. He
She
turned
had
to
to
Margaret.
walk to the intercom
He chose
on the
her.
side pillar.
He chose
Her
poverty.
hand hovered over
Margaret
the button.
corrected, closing
She could
her
call the
folder.
guard. Give it
She
6
could ask him
months.
to open the gate.
She'll leave him
It
when
was
the
her
reality
right,
sets
technically.
in.
She was
Arthur
still
wasn't
Mrs.
so
Sterling
sure.
until the
He had
papers
seen
were
the look in
signed.
the girl's eyes,
But she didn't press it.
It wasn't the look of
She
someone
walked to
who
the
was
pedestrian
defeated.
exit
It was
alongside
the look
the
of
gate,
someone who was waiting.
finding the manual
Perhaps,
latch.
he murmured.
It was stiff,
but I have a
rusted
feeling
from
she knows
disuse,
something we don't.
requiring her to put
Margaret
her full
laughed,
weight
a
against
cold,
it.
sharp sound.
She pushed, metal grinding
She's a
against
watchmaker,
metal,
Arthur.
until there was
What could
just
she
enough
possibly
space
know?
for her to slip
Arthur
through.
didn't answer.
She squeezed
He
past,
turned back to the window,
cold iron
brushing
brushing
until
until
the
the
couple
couple
from
from Hawthorne
and
and
stepped onto the
Associates
public
felt
sidewalk.
heavier than lead.
The change in
She had
atmosphere
carried it
was
for
immediate.
weeks, waiting for the
Inside
right
the
moment.
estate,
The
waiting
air
for
was
a
still
sign.
curated.
Today's
filtered.
rejection felt
Out
like
here,
a
the
sign,
city breathed,
but not the one
Cars
she had
rushed
expected.
past on the main
It
road.
felt like a door
their
slamming
headlights
shut,
cutting through the dark,
forcing her to
tires
open a
humming
window
on the
she had been
asphalt.
too afraid to touch.
The noise was chaotic,
and they finally
unpolished
reached their
and
building.
real.
Elena
Climb up
stood
the
on the
stairs
corner,
was exhausting.
the suitcase resting
Not physically,
against her
but
leg.
spiritually.
She felt exposed.
Every step reminded
For
them
years,
of what they had
she
left
had been
behind.
chauffeured, protected,
The key turned in the
insulated
lock
from
with
the
the ordinary
ordinary click,
struggles of the world.
but the home inside
now,
felt
she was
different.
just a woman
It was
waiting
no
for
longer
a
just
taxi
a
in the
sanctuary.
cold.
She
It was
pulled
a
out her
bunker.
phone.
Lucas
The screen
walked
lit up,
straight to the kitchen
blindingly
sink,
bright in the
turning on the
darkness.
tap and
There were
staring
no
at the
messages
running water.
from Arthur.
His hands
There were
gripping
no
the porcelain
apologies.
edges. There was only
I'll
the
make some
time
coffee,
ticking
Elena
forward,
said softly,
indifferent to
breaking
her
the
pain.
silence.
She opened
Her
a voice
voice
sounded
app.
thin in the small
Her
room.
fingers trembled
Lucas
slightly
didn't
as she
turn
typed
around.
in a destination.
I don't think I can drink
She didn't have a
anything
plan.
right now, Elena.
She couldn't go
My
to her
stomach
parents.
is in knots.
They lived too
Try,
far away,
she insisted,
and she wasn't ready
moving
to
past him
explain
to
the
fill the
shame
kettle.
to them.
She needed
couldn't
to
go
do
to
something
friends.
with her hands.
Most of them were
She
friends
needed
of
the
Arthur,
routine,
connected
the
to
smell
his
of
world,
coffee
his money.
grounds, the boil
She
of
typed
water,
in the
the
name of
pour.
a small boutique
It was a
hotel
ritual of
downtown,
normalcy in
a
a
place
world
she had
that
passed
just
many
tilted
times
on its
but never
axis.
entered.
We
It
need
was
to stay
neutral
warm.
ground.
It's going
She
to be a
booked the
cold
ride.
night. The app
Lucas
told her the
finally
car
turned,
was 4 minutes
leaning
away.
against the counter.
4 minutes.
He looked exhausted.
That was all the time
The
she
lines
had left
around
to be
his
the woman
eyes
who
deeper
lived
than
in
they
the
had been
mansion.
that morning.
She looked back
He
up
meant
the
it,
driveway.
My
The
father.
house stood silhouetted
He won't
against
just let
the
me
night
walk
sky.
away.
Grand
He'll call the
and
bank.
imposing. He'll talk
She
to the
could
landlord.
see a light turn on in the
He'll make
study.
sure no one
Arthur's
hires
me.
study.
We
He
have
was
the
probably
shop,
pouring a
Elena
drink.
reminded him.
He was
placing
probably
a mug in
telling
front of
Vanessa
him.
that the problem
We have
was
our
handled.
skills.
The
We
thought
have each
sent a
other.
spike of pain
For how
through
long?
her chest.
Lucas
Sharp and
asked, his
physical,
voice cracking.
but she breathed through
He picked
it.
up the mug, but
She
didn't
imagined
drink.
that pain as a fire.
Love doesn't pay the heating
burning
bill,
away the
Elena.
last attachment
I told
she
you
had
that.
to that place.
I was so arrogant.
She was not leaving.
I thought
because
my
she
name
was
was enough.
defeated.
I
She
thought
was
I could
leaving
just opt
because
out
she
of the
refused
system
to be a
and
guest
still
in her
survive
own
within
marriage.
But
The
you
car
can't.
arrived, a modest
You either own the
sedan.
game, or
Nothing
you're
like the
played by it.
Blacktown cars.
Elena
she
sat
was
down
used to.
opposite him.
The driver, a
She wanted to
middle-aged
tell
man
him.
with kind eyes,
The words burned
rolled
on her
down the
tongue.
window.
I own the
Elena,
game, Lucas.
he asked, checking
I
his
own the
phone.
board you're afraid of.
Yes, but the
she
timing
said,
was wrong.
her voice sounding
If she
strange
told
to
him
her
now,
own ears,
immediately
rough from
after his
disuse.
father threatened them.
Need help with the
It
bag?
would look like a rescue
he
mission
offered.
getting out. It would look
No,
like she had
thank
been
you,
waiting for them
she
to
said
fall
softly,
so she could
lifting
swoop
the
in.
suitcase into
it
the
would
trunk
validate
herself.
every suspicion
She wanted to
Margaret
do
had
it.
voiced. She needed to
She
feel
needed
the
to
weight
be
of her
sure.
own belongings.
She needed to know the
She slid
extent
into
of
the
what
back
she
seat
held before
The
she laid it on
upholstery
the
was
table.
cloth, worn at
Listen
the
to me,
edges, smelling
Elena
faintly
said,
of air
reaching
freshener
across
and
to
old
cover
coffee.
his.
It was
Hand
the
with
most
hers.
honest thing she had
We are not
smelled all
played.
day.
We are
Where
players.
to?
We
The
just didn't
driver
know the
asked,
rules
looking
yet.
in the rearview mirror.
Now we do. The Grandview
Lucas
Hotel
looked
on
at her,
4th Street,
searching
she
for
said.
hope in her eyes.
Rough night.
You sound so sure.
Gently, noticing her bare legs,
lied,
the lack of a
little.
coat, the tension
She was sure
in
of her
posture.
love.
But the
Elena
rest
looked
was a
out the window
terrifying
as the
unknown.
car pulled away.
Just then, the
phone
mansion
buzzed
began
on
to
the
recede
table.
in the distance.
The screen lit
the
up
lights
with an
shrinking
unknown
until
number.
they were just stars.
Elena's
among
heart skipped a
others.
beat.
No,
She knew that
she
area
said,
code,
and she was
It was
surprised
the
to find
same
she
one
meant
from
it.
the envelope in
It's
her
the
bag.
end of a rough year.
She had been ignoring
tonight,
it for days.
Tonight is just
waiting
the
for the
beginning.
dust to settle.
The driver
But
nodded,
the dust wasn't
understanding
settling.
more than he
It
said,
was choking them.
and turned up the heat.
I should take this.
Elena
she said,
leaned her
standing
head
up
against
quickly.
the cool glass.
It
of
might
the
be about
window.
the shop.
She watched
A
the city
supplier.
blur by.
Lucas
the neon
nodded,
signs
wiping his
reflecting
face
in
with
her
his
eyes.
hands.
Her
Go
phone
ahead.
buzzed in her lap.
I'm going to lie down
She looked
for
down.
a minute.
Arthur's
Elena
name
walked
flashed
into
on
the
the
small
screen.
hallway.
The
Pulling
vibration
the door
hummed
to
against
the
her
bedroom
thigh,
almost
a
closed to
persistent
give
demand
herself
for
privacy.
attention.
Her
He was
hands
probably
trembled
realizing
as she
now
swiped
that
to
she was
answer.
actually gone.
She pressed the phone
He
to
was
her
probably
ear,
feeling
her
the
breath
silence of
catching
the
in her
house
throat.
without her
Ms.
presence
Vance.
to fill it.
The voice
Or
on the
perhaps
other
he was
end
calling
was
to tell her
professional,
she forgot
smooth
something,
and aged.
to find another
Mr.
reason
Hawthorne
to control her.
Yes,
Elena
she watched
whispered,
the phone buzz
gripping
3
the wall
times,
for
then
support.
4.
This
The
is
light
she.
illuminated her
We have been
face,
trying to reach
casting
you,
sharp
Hawthorne
shadows.
said.
The conditions of the trust have been met. She thought about your grandfather's stipulations about asking him how he could do upon your 25th birthday, begging him to come get her, or upon the event the temptation was a physical pressure regarding your marital status. But then she remembered the smell of jasmine on his collar. Given the recent way he had looked at the Sterling family instead of at her, the board believes she remembered the way he had told her to leave. Elena closed her eyes. Elena reached out the ultimatum screen. It wasn't just she didn't answer the call. Her grandfather pressed the button to power the man she barely remembered. The screen built an empire rivaling staring back at her, and pale protected her from the very thing silence in the car returned. What does that mean exactly? No longer the suffocating silence, her voice barely audible. It was the quiet of a held breath that you were no longer just a beneficiary. She turned her head away from the majority shareholder and closed her eyes. As of going to a small room in a hotel, 51% of the outstanding debt. She had limited funds in her personal account. The hallway seemed to spin. She had no idea. Elena had to lean harder against the wall. But as the car merged onto the highway, was so sharp it felt speeding away from the estate. And the Sterlings had rejected her for being poor. Elena felt a strange sensation blooming while she held the keys to their survival in her hand. It was too soon for that. They had tried to buy her off with something quieter what she already owned. It was ownership. They had tried to break Lucas. She owned her next their company. She owned her silence, knowing that the woman they despised and the distant rumble of traffic beyond the gates. Ms. Vance. He exhaled a long, prompted, shuddering breath. Are you still there? He hadn't realized. I'm here. She said. It was done. Strengthening. She was gone. A strange calm. The complication was removed. The fear was still there. The variable was eliminated, but it was mixed with a surge of power she had never felt. He should have felt the weight lift from his shoulders. Nothing yet. Clarity returned to his mind. But as he turned away from the door, you have the vastness of the hallway seemed to press on him. You can call a board meeting at any time. The shadows deeper than before. You can restructure the debt. He walked into the living room, dissolved the merger there, tied further until he pulled it off completely. The power is yours, tossing it onto the sofa. But I must advise caution. He went to the bar and revealing your identity now will change everything. The amber liquid, your relationship with Mr. Sterling. It will never be the trembled same. Slightly as he Elena looked through the crack in the bedroom. He told himself it was the cold. She could see Lucas sitting at the kitchen table, deep down, his head in his hands. He knew it was the echo of her voice. He looked defeated. He looked like a man who had lost his world. The words rang in his ears. She knew she could walk out there and give it back to him. The burn doing little broken mechanism with a single phone call. You did the right thing. But would he see it as a gift? The voice came from the shadows of the staircase. Would he feel safe? Vanessa stepped into the light, descending slowly. I understand. She was wearing a silk robe that belonged to the house. Don't release any public statements. She had been waiting upstairs, my identity confidential for now. Arthur didn't jump, as you wish. He had expected. But remember, secrecy he had invited her over hours ago. The market will notice her to wait in the study until the situation. Thank you, Mr. Hawthorne. Now the situation was before he could say anything else. She left. She stood in the hallway for a long moment. He didn't look at Vanessa still pressed to her ear, even though the line stared into his glass. She looked at her reflection in the mirror, coming to stand beside him. She saw the same simple dress and placed a hand on his arm. But inside, everything had shifted. Now you could no longer just Elena. No more distractions. She was Elena Vance. Arthur finally looked at her. The woman Margaret harsh light of the chandelier distraction. She looked different. Was now the person in the dimly lit offices where they had started their affair. She took a deep breath. She looked sharper, steadying more calculated. She couldn't tell Lucas weren't filled with sympathy. Not tonight. They were filled. Tonight was about grief. She didn't take any to mourn the loss of his family's approval. More to himself he could accept a new reality. Just a suitcase. If she told him now, the jewelry, it would overshadow his pain. Because she knows she doesn't deserve them. Unnecessary. Vanessa said smoothly. She needed to let him feel the weight of his hand and setting it so that when the truth came out, she wrapped her arms around his waist, her for herself, pressing herself against not for what she could give him. She was holding you back. Elena Arthur slipped the phone into her pocket. Everyone knows it. Back into the kitchen. Now you can breathe. Lucas looked Arthur up, allowed himself to be held, eyes, but his body was it bad news? Rigid. Elena forced a smile, eyes trying to summon the feeling of freedom. He had just administrative. Instead, more time to process ache in his stomach. Nothing. The house was quiet. Lucas let out a breath. He seemed to have been holding for hours. Elena would be reading in the corner. Okay, we can handle it. Humming softly, always organizing files. Always, next day. The absence of her presence was and wrapped her arms around his neck. I need to make some calls. Her forehead against he said gently. She could feel the warmth of his skin, the steady beat of his heart. The board needs to know the situation. He had chosen her over millions of dollars. Later, he had chosen love over legacy. Back. That was worth more than any company share. We should celebrate. I'm scared. Open the line. He admitted. Sit by the fire. I know. I'm not in the mood for celebration, but I'm here. Arthur snapped, and I'm not going anywhere. Surfacing quickly. She held him tighter. He walked over to the window that burned, looking out at the dark driveway. It was a protective lie. Taxi told herself. For now, I just lost my wife. But as she looked over his shoulder, however necessary it was, where the city lights twinkled like distant stars, Vanessa's expression hardened for a fraction of a second. The Sterlings would feel the shift with a smile. The market would react. You didn't lose her, Arthur. And when the storm broke, freed yourself. She would have to be ready to stand not just beside Lucas. It will weaken you, but in front of him. You need to be strong, shielding him from the fallout of his family's arrogance. Arthur nodded slowly. The irony tasted bitter and sweet all at once. For they had disowned her for not being enough. He turned back to she was the only one. Vanessa was pouring herself a drink. She rested her chin on moving around the space, closing her eyes. The
She
game had
touched
changed.
the ornaments on the mantle.
The pieces were set.
Ran her hand over
and
the
she was
back
the
of
only one
Elena's
who knew
favorite
how the
chair.
board really worked.
Every touch felt like a
Sleep,
violation, she murmured.
Yet Arthur
Tomorrow
said
we
nothing.
start again.
He had invited
Tomorrow,
this.
Lucas
He had
echoed,
opened the door,
pulling away
He
slightly
walked to the
look at
sofa
her.
and sat down,
Whatever happens,
burying
we
his
face
face
it
in his
together.
hands. Together,
The
relief
relief
he had hoped for was nowhere.
But as she
to be
watched him
found.
walk toward the bedroom,
There was only the
Elena
noise of
touched
the ice
pocket
clinking
where
in
her phone
Vanessa's
lay.
glass.
The weight
and
of the secret
overwhelming
was
scent
heavy,
of jasmine
but for the
that now
first time,
permeated every
she didn't
corner
feel
of the room.
burdened by it.
Suffocating
She felt
the
armed.
memory of Elena's
The Sterlings
lavender
thought
soap.
they had won by
Miles
cutting them
away.
off.
The taxi
They didn't know
pulled
they
up
had
to
just
the curb
severed
of
their
the
own
Grandview
lifeline.
Hotel.
And
It
she
was a
aged
modest
Lucas
building,
fitfully,
brick-faced
his brow
and
furrowed
unassuming,
even in rest.
nestled between a bakery
She watched
and
the
a
rise
laundromat.
and fall of his
The
chest,
neon sign buzzed
memorizing
with
the
a
rhythm.
faint flicker. She knew that
Casting
when
a
he woke,
pinkish glow
the
on
reality
the
of
wet
yesterday would crash
Elena
down
paid
on
the
him
driver
all
in
over
cash.
again.
Thanking
The
him
boardroom,
quietly.
the ultimatum.
She lifted
the
her
rejection.
suitcase from the
It
trunk.
wasn't a dream. It felt heavier.
It was their
now.
life now.
The weight of her
She
entire
slipped out of bed
existence
quietly,
condensed into
careful
leather
not to
and
wake him.
fabric. The apartment
She walked
was through
cold.
the revolving doors.
The heating
into
had
the
been
lobby.
paid for the month.
The air inside
But the
smelled
knowledge
of floor
that
wax
future
and
bills
old
were now
carpet.
their sole
A
responsibility.
man behind the
made
desk
the
looked
chill
up
feel
from a
penetrating.
newspaper. Elena
Adjusting
walked
his
to the
glasses.
kitchen and touched
Check
the phone
in,
in her pocket.
he asked, his voice
It was a
raspy.
secret weight.
Yes,
a stone of
Elena
power
said,
in a sea of
approaching the counter.
uncertainty. She
She
felt
could fix
suddenly
this.
self-conscious. She could make a call.
Her dress was
and the
elegant,
Sterling's threats
out of
would
place
vanish.
among the weary
But would
travelers
Lucas
and
ever
business
look at her the
people
same
in
way
casual
again?
wear.
Would he feel
She
like a
hoped he
project
wouldn't
she had
recognize her
saved?
name.
The love
She
they
used her
shared
maiden
was
name
built
for
on
the
the
quality,
reservation,
an
on
instinctive
instinctive fixing
protective
broken
measure.
things together. Sterling. If she revealed
Elena
herself
Sterling,
as the savior, the clerk
the balance
typed on the
would tip.
keyboard. He would
Room
feel indebted.
304.
And pride,
Elevators
she
to
knew,
the left.
was a fragile
Breakfast
thing
is
in a
from
man
6
who
to
had just
9.
lost his inheritance.
Thank you,
she said. Lucas appeared
took
in the
the key
doorway,
card,
rubbing his eyes.
It was a simple plastic
He wore the same
rectangle.
clothes from yesterday,
Nothing like the heavy
wrinkled
metal
and
keys
weary.
of the mansion.
Morning, she
He
walked to the
rasped.
elevator.
He tried
the
to
heels
smile,
of her shoes,
but it was a
clicking on
ghost
the
of his
linoleum
usual
floor.
warmth.
The ride up
Morning,
was slow.
Elena
the cable
replied,
humming
turning
loudly.
on the kettle.
When the doors
I made
opened on the
coffee.
third floor,
You're an
the
angel,
hallway was
he
long
said,
and narrow,
walking over to
lit
kiss
by
her
sconces
cheek.
that buzzed
His
softly.
lips were cold.
She found her
He leaned
room
against the
and
counter,
swiped the card, staring at the
lock
small
beat
stack
screen.
of mail on the table.
She pushed the door open.
I should check the accounts.
The room was small,
See where we
clean, and
stand with
functional.
the shop supplies.
A double bed with a white
Elena's
quilt,
heart tightened.
a nightstand
She
with
knew
a
what he
lamp,
would find.
a television
Arthur
mounted
Sterling
on the
had
wall,
connections
and
with
a
every
window
major
that looked
bank
out
in
onto
the
a
city.
brick wall.
Lucas. It was nothing
She
like the
started,
master
but
suite
he was
she had
already
left
moving to his
behind.
laptop.
There were no
Just a
velvet
quick
drapes,
check,
no
he
marble
said,
bathroom,
opening the browser.
no view of the garden.
He logged in, his
But as
fingers
Elena
tapping
stepped
nervously
inside
on the
and
keys.
closed the door, the loading
Locking it
circle
behind
spun
her,
for a few
she
seconds.
felt a sense of
an
safety
eternity
she
she
hadn't
hadn't felt
felt
in
in
months. Then a message popped
no
up.
one expected
Account
anything from
frozen
her.
pending review.
Here, she was just a
Lucas
guest.
stared at the screen.
She placed the
He blinked,
suitcase on the
refreshed
bed
the
and
page.
opened it.
The
She
message
took out a
remained.
change of clothes,
He tried another
simple
account.
jeans and a sweater.
Access denied.
And went into the bathroom.
He let out a short,
The mirror was
humorless
plain,
laugh.
unframed.
He didn't wait. She looked at her
Lucas said,
reflection,
his voice hollow.
Her eyes were
I knew
tired,
he would, but
the panic was
I didn't
gone.
think he'd move this
She washed her
fast.
face.
He's
the
freezing
cool water
everything.
shocking her skin.
The business account.
She dried
my
her
personal
face with a
savings.
thin towel.
He's
and
trying
looked
to
at
starve
herself
us
again.
out.
Elena
You are
walked
okay,
over and
she
placed a
whispered to the
hand on his
reflection.
shoulder. You are
She
okay.
could feel the tension
She
radiating
changed into
from
the
his
comfortable
muscles,
clothes
tight
and
as
sat
steel
on the
cables.
edge of the bed. We have cash
She picked
from
up
the
her
shop.
phone.
We'll
It was
manage.
still off.
For how
She
long,
hesitated.
Elena?
Her
Lucas
thumb
stood
hovering
up,
over the
pushing
power
the laptop
button.
away.
If
as
she
if
turned it
burned
on,
him. The messages
began
would
to
flood
pace
in.
the small kitchen.
Arthur,
He's
probably
not just
angry
cutting me
that she
off.
hadn't answered.
He's sending a message.
Maybe friends.
He wants me to
confused
come
by her
crawling back.
disappearance. He wants
Maybe
me to
the
bring
press,
you to him
if someone
and
had
tell you
seen
it's
her
over.
leave.
He
She
stopped
wasn't
and
ready
looked
for
at her,
any of that.
his eyes filled
She
with
placed
a
the
mixture
phone
of
on the
anger and
nightstand,
despair.
face down.
I can't let him win.
She lay back on the bed.
But I can't let you
The
suffer
mattress was
because of
firm,
my
the pillow
stubbornness.
soft.
I am not
She pulled the
suffering,
quilt up to her
Elena
chin.
said firmly. The silence
She
here
stepped
was
into his
different from
path,
the mansion,
forcing him to
It
look
wasn't
at her.
heavy or accusatory.
I am here.
It
By
was
choice.
neutral. Do
It
not
allowed her
take
to
that
think.
away from me by
She thought
deciding
about
what
the
I
money.
can endure. She had her
But it's
personal
not
account,
fair.
separate
Lucas
from the
shouted.
joint accounts. The frustration
It wasn't a
finally
fortune,
boiling over,
but it was enough
He
for a
slammed
few
his hand
months.
against the wall,
Enough to breathe.
then immediately
Enough to
winced,
plan.
rubbing his knuckles.
She thought about her skills.
You deserve better.
Before Arthur,
you deserve
she had been
been a financial analyst.
And I dragged you into
a
a war I can't
She
win.
had given it up to manage
We are
his
winning,
household,
Elena lied,
to be the
her
perfect
perfect
wife.
We are
That
still
woman
standing.
was gone. That is a
The woman
victory.
lying in this hotel
Lucas
room
slumped
was
against the
someone
counter,
else.
defeated.
Someone who had
I
been
need to go to
stripped
the
of
shop.
everything except
I need
her
to
own
work.
mind.
If I sit
She
here,
closed
I'll
her
go
eyes.
crazy. Sleep
Okay,
came surprisingly
Elena said.
quickly.
I'll come with
Not
you.
the drug-induced
The walk
sleep
to the
of
watch
avoidance,
shop was
but
silent,
the deep,
exhausted
the city was
sleep.
bustling
Of
someone
people
who
rushing
fought
to
a battle
jobs they
and
hated.
survived. Worrying about
Back at the
problems
mansion,
that felt
the
small
night
compared
dragged
to
on.
theirs. Arthur sat
Elena
and
watched
watched
Lucas
the
from the
whiskey
corner of
bottle
her
half
eye.
empty. He walked with
Vanessa
his head
had
down
gone to sleep in the
avoiding
guest
the
room
gaze of
upstairs.
passers-by. Sensing
He
his
felt
mood
exposed
was not conducive
to
to
the
the
world.
world. He was still a sterling.
Arthur stared at
but
the
he knew he
computer
was now
screen.
in exile.
The numbers blurring
The shame was a
before his
physical
eyes.
cloak he wore.
He tried to work.
When they arrived
to
at the
focus on
shop,
merger
the
details,
familiar smell
but
of
his mind
oil
kept
and
drifting.
old wood greeted them.
He imagined Elena
It should have been
in that
comforting.
hotel room.
Instead,
Was
it
she
felt
cold?
like a cage.
Was she hungry?
Lucas went
Did
straight
she
to the
regret
workbench,
leaving?
picking up. He wanted to believe she
loop
was
and a
suffering,
disassembled
that
clock.
she was crying somewhere.
His hands,
missing
usually
him.
so steady,
It would
trembled
validate his
slightly.
decision. He tried
But
to
he
fit
couldn't
a gear
shake
into
the
place,
image of her
but
standing
it
on the
slipped,
porch,
clattering
straight
onto
back
the
to him
table.
calm.
Damn it,
he cursed, sweeping the
stood
tools
up
aside.
and walked to the window.
He buried his face in
the
his
driveway
hands.
was empty.
I can't even
the gate
fix
was
a simple
closed.
mechanism.
The world outside
What kind of
was
man
dark.
am I?
He picked
Elena
up his
moved
phone
around the
and dialed
counter
her number.
and stood behind him.
It went straight to voicemail.
She didn't speak.
He tried
She
again.
simply placed her hands
Still
on
off.
his shoulders.
He threw the
and
phone
began
onto
to
the
massage
desk.
the tension away.
The sound was sharp
She
in the
could
quiet
feel the
room.
heat of his skin.
He felt a
the
surge of
rapid
anger,
pulse in his
followed
neck.
immediately
You
by
are a man
wave
who
of
is hurting,
loneliness,
she
so
whispered.
profound it made his
Give
knees
yourself
weak.
grace, Lucas.
He had won.
He called me
He had
this
protected
morning.
his business.
Lucas said into his
He had
palms.
cleared the house of the
My
conflict.
father.
He
So
didn't
why did
yell.
it feel like he had
He
lost
just stated
everything
facts.
that mattered?
He said the
poured
company's
another
stock
drink,
is dipping,
but he didn't
because of
drink
the
it.
uncertainty
He
of
just
my
held the
position.
glass.
He
watching
said,
the
I am
liquid
hurting
swirl.
shareholders. The
He
jasmine
made me
scent
feel
was
like a
overwhelming
criminal
now.
for wanting to be happy.
It smelled cloying.
Elena's
artificial.
blood ran cold.
He missed the smell
She
of
knew
rain.
the stock was dipping.
He missed the smell of
She
lavender.
had seen the reports on
He
her
missed the
phone
sound
when
of
she
someone
called
else
Hawthorne.
breathing in the house.
It wasn't because of
He sat
Lucas.
down in the leather chair.
It was because
and put
Vance
his head
Global
in his
had started
hands.
quietly
The
acquiring
victory was
shares,
hollow. The
creating
celebration
market
was
volatility.
empty.
Her
And for the
father's
first
company
time,
was maneuvering,
a seed of doubt
and
took
Lucas
root
was
in the
taking
back of
of
his
blame.
mind. The
Irony
irony
was
was
suffocating.
Morning
She
came
was the cause of
eventually,
the pressure,
gray and
and he was the
overcast.
victim.
In the
Lucas,
hotel room,
she said,
Elena
her voice
woke up
trembling
with the sun.
slightly. She
It's
stretched,
not your fault.
her muscles stiff
It
but
feels
rested.
like it,
he murmured.
She sat up and looked
turned
around
on
the
the
room,
stool
and
for
took
a
her
second
hands in
she
his.
forgot where she was.
His eyes were red.
Then the memory returned.
Elena, I love
not
you.
with a shock,
More than
but
anything.
with a steady acceptance.
But I can't ask you to
She
stay
got out of
in the
bed and
sinking
walked
ship.
to the window.
If my father
She couldn't
wants
see
me to
the sky,
choose, only
maybe
the
I
brick
should let you
wall.
go.
But she
So
could
you
hear
can be
the
safe.
city waking up. So you don't get
Sirens
dragged down
in the
with me.
distance, the rumble
The words
of
hit her
buses,
like a physical
people
blow.
talking on the sidewalk.
This was the ultimatum.
Life was
working its
happening.
poison. She turned on
He
her
was trying to
phone.
sacrifice
As
himself
expected,
for her.
there were notifications.
Just as she was planning to
12
sacrifice
missed
her
calls
truth
from
for
Arthur.
him.
He thought
Several
letting her
text
go
messages.
was an act of love.
She didn't open them.
No. She
Elena
deleted
said,
the notifications,
pulling her hands
without
away
reading.
slightly to cup his
She wouldn't
face.
let him dictate her
You don't
morning.
get to make that choice.
She showered in the small
That
bathroom.
is my choice.
The water
And I
pressure
choose
weak
you.
but warm.
Do you understand?
She dressed in the jeans
I am not
and
a
sweater,
passenger in your life,
pulling her hair
Lucas.
back into a simple
I am your
ponytail.
partner. She
But I
looked
have
in the
nothing
mirror.
to give you.
She
looked like a
whispered.
stranger.
I'm
but a
broke.
strong one.
I'm disowned.
She went downstairs
I'm
to
nothing.
the lobby.
You are
The
everything.
clerk from the night
she
before was
countered,
gone,
tears pricking her
replaced by
eyes.
a woman with a
You
bright
are honest.
smile.
You are
Morning,
kind.
the woman
You
said.
are real.
Coffee
Money
is in the
comes and
corner.
goes.
Thank you.
Families
Elena
fade.
said. But what we
She
have,
poured a cup of
that is
coffee.
rare. It was
Don't
generic,
throw it away
slightly
because
bitter,
you are scared.
but it tasted real.
Lucas looked at her.
She sat at a
searching
small
for any
table
sign
near
of
the
doubt.
window and opened
He found
her
none.
laptop. He leaned
She had work
forward
to do.
and rested his
She had a
forehead
life to
against hers.
rebuild.
I'm
She
so
didn't know how
scared,
yet,
Elena, but she knew
I
she
know,
would.
she breathed.
She took a
But
sip
I'm
of the
here.
coffee and
They
looked
stayed
out
like
at the
that for a
street.
long moment.
People were rushing to
breathing in
work,
sync.
heads down,
But over
focused
Lucas's
on their own
shoulder,
struggles.
Elena's eyes
She was
opened.
one of them now. She looked at the
No
phone,
longer a
sitting
queen
on
in
the
a
workbench,
castle,
but a
It
woman
buzzed
in the
silently.
world. And
A
as she
text from
watched the
Hawthorne.
traffic flow,
The board
Elena
is ready
felt a
for your
spark of
directive.
something she hadn't
The
felt
sterling
in years.
acquisition is at
Possibility.
49%.
At the mansion,
One more push,
Arthur woke
and we
up on the
control the
sofa in the
vote.
study. She looked
His
back
neck
at
was
Lucas,
stiff,
his mouth dry.
He was closed his eyes.
The room was cold,
finding peace
He
in her
stood up
presence.
and walked to the bedroom.
If she told him now,
the bed was
peace would
made
shatter.
perfectly smooth.
He would feel manipulated.
Vanessa was in the shower.
He would feel like a
He
pawn
could hear
in her
the water
game.
running. She couldn't
He
do
walked
that
to
to him.
Elena's side of the
She had to
closet.
protect him from
It was
the
empty
truth until he
Just
was
the
strong
wooden
enough to
hangers
stand
remaining,
beside her as an
swaying
equal,
slightly in the draft.
not beneath her as a
He reached out
beneficiary.
and touched one of the
She made her
hangers.
decision.
It felt
She would
cold.
not reveal her
He
identity
closed the
yet.
closet door gently.
She would use her power
walked
to
back to the
stabilize
study
the
and
situation
looked at his
from the
phone.
shadows.
Still no answer.
She would stop her company
He
from
realized
crushing
then
Sterling
that the
completely,
silence wasn't just
giving
for the
them
night.
enough rope to hang
It was
themselves,
permanent,
but not
She
enough
wasn't
to
coming
destroy
back.
Lucas's
Not
legacy
today.
entirely. Contrast
She
to
would
the
become the
soundproof
invisible
luxury
hand
of the
that
estate
guided them
but
to
here,
safety.
the noise
It was
felt
a lonely
alive.
path.
It was the
She would
sound
have
of
to
people
bear the weight
surviving.
of the secret alone.
Elena sat at a
I
small,
need to make a call.
wobbly table
Elena
that
said
served as
softly,
both her
pulling
dining
away.
surface and
To
her
my
desk.
cousin.
A
About
single
some
lamp
family
cast
money.
a yellow pool
Maybe
of
we
light
can get a
over
small
spread of
loan
papers,
to keep the shop
bank
running.
statements, rent
Lucas
notices,
looked up,
and job
hope flickering in
applications.
his eyes.
Her
You
laptop
do that?
screen glowed softly.
Ask your family for help.
The light reflecting
They
in
owe
her
me,
tired eyes.
Elena said, her voice
She
steady.
tapped the keys of her
It
calculator.
wasn't a lie, not
the sound
entirely.
sharp in the quiet
Let me handle
room.
this.
The numbers
You focus
didn't
on
add
the
up.
watches.
Her personal
Let me fight
savings.
this battle.
Once a safety
Lucas
net, she
hesitated.
rarely barely thought about. His pride were dwindling faster than she had anticipated. Finally, he nodded. The hotel had eaten a significant portion. And I don't know what I'd do without deposit for this. You'll never have to find out. Taken another chunk. Promised. She picked up her to the back office, noticing it was empty, and her hands shook as she couldn't afford the expensive blends. When he answered, her voice was cold. This was instant coffee, bitter and gritty, but it kept her awake. She looked at the job application. The lawyer sounded surprised. It was for a junior analyst position at a mid-sized firm. Looking through the thin wall at step down from the consulting work she had done before marrying Arthur. He was trying to fix the gear, but it was a start. The field labeled reason for leaving last. Do not initiate a hostile takeover. Not she hesitated. I want you to stabilize. How could she explain a 5-year gap by the debt, but restructure it? How could she explain leaving without a reference? That is from her unconventional. Hawthorne if she put Sterling, they rejected recruiters would see the name and assume she was a socialite looking for. Because he is in there, a hobby, not a professional voice cracking slightly. If she used her maiden name, she had to explain the gap. I need to save the personal sabbatical without him knowing it was me. She typed family reasons. There was a pause on the line. Too. It will be difficult. She left it blank. But yes, she would explain it a shell company. If she got an anonymous investor, her phone buzzed on the table. Commanded. She glanced at Mr. Hawthorne, her heart skipping not a word to anyone. She saw the name, especially not Arthur Sterling. It was an unknown number. Wish, Ms. Vance. She let it go to voicemail. She hung up and leaned against the door. She wasn't ready to talk to sliding down until she sat on the floor. She wasn't ready to hear came pity then hot and fast. She minimized the job application, checking her reflection browser. The headline caught her eye immediately. She composed her face. Sterling Industries had to be strong. Quarterly losses. She had to be the wall between Lucas and the storm. She clicked the article. When she walked back out, there was a photo of Arthur. He looked exhausted. They will transfer the funds eyes deeper than she remembered, forcing a smile. The article mentioned mismanagement. Lucas let out a long breath, his shoulders dropping. Elena felt a pang of sympathy. We saved us, suppressed by the memory of his cold voice. She walked over and kissed him. He was suffering the consequences of his choices. But as she held him, suffering, she felt the distance growing. The secret was a wedge. She was building something from the ashes. She was protecting him. She closed the laptop, but she was also hiding, stretching her stiff back. She wondered how long the apartment was sparse. How long before small sofa, a few boxes still. And when it did, would he forgive her? She walked to the kitchenette to refill. The day wore on. As she turned on the tap and went, a spray of water shot out sideways from the base of the faucet. Lucas worked with renewed focus. She cursed softly, the weight lifted, turning the handle off. Elena watched another thing broke. Her heart full of love. In the mansion, heavy with a leaking faucet would have been. She had chosen to protect him by a maintenance but she knew that protection. Here, it was her problem. She looked at the puddle forming on the laminate canyon of secrets. She could call the landlord, fell, but he was slow to respond. The street lights flickered on again. Lucas took her hand as they walked to the sink. I don't say it enough, toolkit she had bought at a hardware store. But you are the best thing that ever happened. She grabbed an adjustable wrench. Elena squeezed his hand, plumber's tape, hiding the tremor. She spent the next hour on her knees. I know, she said, watching tutorial videos on her phone. They walked into the night, getting dirty with two figures against the city lights. It was frustrating. Elena looked up at the sky, where the first stars were appearing. She scraped her knuckle. She thought of the empire she owned, drawing a drop power she wielded. She sat back on her nothing compared to the warmth of sense that they were living on borrowed time. Tears pricked her eyes, not from the pain. He spent late nights overwhelming sense of inadequacy, tracing the origins of the loan that had saved. She was supposed to manage couldn't find the source, not fix plumbing, and that terrified her. Then she looked at the blood on her hand. To Lucas, it was real. Mystery meant danger. It was hers. To Elena, she wiped it on a rag and tightened her grip on the wall between them was growing thicker. Come on, every secret she whispered to the pipe. One evening, she put her weight into the rain returned, muscles straining, tapping against the sudden groan of just metal, as it had on the night they went to the mansion. She worked quickly. Elena stood by the sink, tightening the connection and turning the water back on. Lucas sat at the table, a letter in his hand, just a steady stream. It was from his father's lawyers. She sat on the floor. They had noticed the influx of capital and let out a laugh. It was a dry, shaky sound, but it was hers. They were threatening an audit. She had fixed it. They know. She hadn't called for help. His voice devoid. She hadn't waited for a man to solve her problem. They say the sense of pride swelled in her chest. They say if I don't return the money, it was a small victory, questionable, insignificant in the grand scheme of the world. They'll report me to the authorities. But to her, it was Elena dried her hands slowly. It proved she could survive. To face him. She could adapt. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She cleaned her hands and went back to the table. The job application seemed less daunting. They would sniff out any anomaly. She wasn't just a wife looking for work, and she was the anomaly. She was a woman who could fix what was broken. The next week brought a mix of rejection and resilience. Lucas finally looked at her. She went to 3 interviews. His eyes were dark. The first one was exhaustion that went the interviewer barely looking up from his resume. Where did the money come from? The second one was polite. He told me it was a family loan. Asking but I called your cousin. Approved of her work. She doesn't know anything. She walked out of that one without saying goodbye. Elena the third one, however, was different. She had been caught in the lie. The firm was small. She could tell him specialized in forensic accounting. She could walk over to him, the interviewer, take the letter, a woman named Sarah, and make a phone call looked at her portfolio with genuine interest. She could reveal that she was the heir to Vance Global. They asked about her skills. She owned the debt. They asked about her analysis of market trends. But the timing was wrong. Elena spoke with a clarity she hadn't possessed in years. If she revealed it now, she talked about risk assessment. After he had digging into the details others overlooked, it would look like she saw Sarah nodding. At the end of the meeting, she had let him suffer. Sarah shook her hand to prove a point. We'll be in touch. It would look like revenge. You have a sharp eye, Elena. I had to protect us. Walking home that evening, her voice trembling. The wind was colder. She couldn't say more without saying everything. She stopped at a grocery store. Lucas stood up, ingredients for the chair scraping harshly against chicken, vegetables, rice. I chose you over millions, Elena. I chose you over my family, enjoying the process of chopping. I did that because I thought we were partners. As she ate, her phone buzzed again. Big secrets. This time, it was an email. And now my father is using those secrets to try to destroy me. Sterling and he rubbed his face, his voice breaking. She almost dropped her fork. I can't do this. It wasn't Arthur's company. I can't fight a war where I don't even know who the enemy is. Is it my father? Or is it the salary was modest. The word struck her like barely half of what the household allowance. She saw the doubt in his eyes. But it was enough. It wasn't anger. It was independence. He felt replied immediately, except she realized then that her protection was
across
becoming
the city,
his prison.
the atmosphere
As long
in
as
the
she was
mansion
here,
was growing,
hiding her
increasingly
power,
toxic.
he would always
Arthur
feel like
sat
he
at
was
the head of
failing
the
to
dining
provide,
table,
failing to
the
protect
same
her.
table where he had
He would
told
always
Elena
be
to
looking
leave.
over his shoulder.
Now Vanessa
waiting
sat
for the
opposite
other shoe
him,
to drop,
scrolling through her
he needed
phone
to
while
stand
she
on his
ate.
own.
The
He
staff
needed
had
to
been
know he
reduced
could
to save
survive
costs,
without her,
a fact
without
that
her money,
annoyed Vanessa
without
greatly.
her secrets.
The service
And
is
she
terrible,
needed to build her
she
empire
complained,
without
pushing
the
her
shadow
plate
of
away.
his family's
Where's
prejudice
the chef?
hanging over her.
I told you I
move.
wanted the sea base.
She made the
prepared a
decision in
specific
that
way.
moment.
We
It
don't
was
have
the
a
hardest
chef
thing
anymore,
she had ever
Vanessa.
done.
Arthur said,
Harder than
his voice
facing his
weary.
parents.
He rubbed his
Harder
eyes.
than hiding the letter
quarterly
in her
losses.
bag. She had to
Were
let
weighing
him
on
go.
him.
Not
The board
because she
was
stopped
questioning
loving
his
him,
decisions,
but because she
the merger
loved him
was
enough to
stalling.
let him find his own
We have a
strength.
caterer who comes twice
And
a
she
week.
needed to find hers.
Well, get
without
someone
him
else.
looking down on her
Vanessa
from a
said
pedestal
dismissively.
she had secretly
I have a
built.
gala next week.
You're right. I need a
Elena
dress.
said softly.
And I was
She
thinking,
walked over
since
to the
house
table
is so
and
empty,
placed her hands
you should
on the
renovate
wood,
the east
steadying
wing.
herself.
It's so dark in
You
there.
shouldn't have to fight this
Arthur
war.
looked at her,
Not
really
like
looked
this.
at her. For
What
the
does
first
that
time
mean?
in weeks.
Lucas asked.
He saw the
sensing
entitlement
the shift
in her
posture.
tone. The lack
The
of
anger was
empathy in her
fading,
eyes,
replaced by fear.
She didn't care about the
It means I'm
business.
leaving.
She
She
didn't
said.
care about him.
The words felt.
She cared about the
like
lifestyle.
glass in her throat.
We aren't renovating.
Lucas stepped back
Arthur
as if
said
she had
quietly.
pushed him.
We aren't
What?
spending money on
No.
galas.
Elena, no.
Not now. We can fix
Vanessa's
this.
eyes narrowed.
We can return the
What
money.
do you mean?
We
You're
can.
Arthur Sterling.
There's nothing to
You're
fix.
supposed to be
Lucas.
rich, she interrupted.
I am trying
her
to
voice
stay
gaining
solvent.
strength.
Arthur
She
snapped,
couldn't let him
standing
argue.
up.
If
you have any
argued, she
idea
would
what is
break.
happening out there,
You need to be free.
The stock is down.
You need to rebuild your
the
life
investors
without-
are nervous. Without
I
me
need
complicating
focus,
it,
not demands
your
for new
family
dresses.
wants you to choose. You kicked out
Fine.
your wife for me.
I'm choosing
Vanessa
for you.
said. I don't
Her
want
voice
you to
dropping
choose
to
for
a
me.
dangerous whisper.
Lucas shouted.
You said life would
rounding
be
the
easier.
table to grab her
You
arms.
said I was the solution.
I want you to stay,
but you look more
I want us
stressed
to fight
than ever.
together. I thought.
And that's exactly
Arthur
the problem.
started, but he stopped.
Elena said.
He thought
Tears
what?
finally
That
spilling
Elena
over.
was the burden.
She didn't wipe
He looked
them
around
away.
the room. We aren't
It was
fighting
clean,
together, but it felt
I'm
sterile.
fighting for you.
There were no
And you're
flowers
fighting against
because
them.
no one
And in
remembered
the
to
middle,
buy them.
we're losing us.
There was no music.
You need to know who you
there was
are
no
without
warmth.
me, Lucas.
He realized
And I
with
need
a
to know
sinking
who I am
feeling that
without you.
Elena had been the
That's
engine
cowardice,
of this house.
he whispered.
Not him. His grip on her arms
She had managed
loosening.
the staff.
You're
the
running away.
schedules,
The social
Maybe, she
obligations that
admitted.
kept his
Or
reputation
maybe I'm giving you
polished.
the chance to win.
He had taken her for
If I
granted.
stay, you'll
assuming
always
her
wonder
role
if you
was
succeeded
passive.
because of you.
Now, without
or
her,
because of me.
the machine was
because of
grinding
my
to a
connections,
halt.
my secrets.
I need some air.
I won't be that doubt
Arthur
in your
said,
mind. Walking away
She
from
pulled
the
away
table.
from him and
He went
walked
to his
toward
study
the
and
bedroom.
closed the door.
She didn't pack
He
much.
sat in his chair.
She
and
took a
opened his
small
laptop.
suitcase from the closet.
He typed Elena's
She
name
folded a
into
few
the search
clothes.
bar.
Simple things.
He hadn't done this in
She left the
weeks,
gifts he had
afraid of
given
what
her
he
on
might
the dresser.
find.
There
She
were
left
no
the
recent
money they had
articles
saved
about her.
together on the kitchen
She had vanished
counter.
from the social
She
scene.
would take only her
It
memories.
was as if she had ceased
The
to
watch he had
exist.
fixed for her.
He felt a pang
photo
of
of
guilt
them in the
so
park.
sharp it made him
The
breathe
love that
harder.
lived in her heart.
Was she okay?
Which she
Was
couldn't
she
pack
hungry?
away no matter
Did
how
she hate
hard
him?
she tried.
He picked up
Lucas
his phone
followed her
and
to the
dialed her
doorway.
number again. He leaned against
Still
the
went to
frame,
voicemail,
watching her pack.
He left a message.
He looked
his
broken.
voice cracking.
If you walk out
Elena,
that door,
please.
Elena, just call me.
I don't know if I can bring
I need to
you
know
back.
you're safe.
I'm not
Hi.
asking you to.
I miss you,
she said.
He hung up
zipping
and
the
put his head in
suitcase.
his hands. She stood up
The
and
silence
faced
of the
him.
house pressed
The
in on
distance
him,
between them was
heavier
only a
than
few
ever.
feet.
Back
But
in
it
the
felt like
apartment,
miles. Elena was
You will be
preparing
okay,
for her
Lucas.
first day of work.
You are stronger than
She
you know.
laid out her clothes
Stronger
on the
than
bed.
your father knows.
A simple suit, nothing
Prove it to them.
flashy. Prove it
She
to
looked at
yourself.
herself in the mirror.
And what about us?
She looked different.
He asked, his voice
Thinner,
barely
perhaps,
a whisper.
but stronger.
Is this the end?
Her eyes were clear.
Elena looked at him.
She wasn't
memorizing
walking
the
into a
curve
room
of his
as
jaw,
someone's wife.
the color of his eyes.
She was walking in as
She
herself.
wanted to tell him. She packed
Wait
her
for
bag,
me.
double
When I
checking
come
she
back,
had her keys,
I will
her
be your
wallet,
equal
her
in
ID.
every way.
She paused
But
at
she
the door,
couldn't.
looking
Not
back
yet.
at the small room.
I don't know.
It wasn't
She
a
said
mansion.
honestly.
It wasn't
But right
perfect.
now, this is the
But
only
it was
way I
hers.
can protect you.
She had earned every
them.
inch of it. And from me,
She stepped out into
she
the
picked
hallway
up the
and
suitcase.
locked the door.
It felt
The
light.
walk to the
but her
subway
soul
station
felt
was
heavy.
20 minutes.
She walked past
She
him
joined
into
the crowd
living
of
room.
commuters.
He didn't
shoulder
stop
to
her.
shoulder with
He
strangers.
stood in the bedroom doorway.
No one knew who she was.
watching her go.
No one
like a
bowed.
ghost haunting his
No
own
one
life.
opened doors.
At the front
She
door,
bought her
Elena
ticket
paused
and waited on the
her hand on the
platform.
knob. When the train
wanted
arrived,
to turn around.
She squeezed
She
in
wanted
with
to
the
throw
rest of herself into his arms and tell him
It was crowded and
everything.
hot, but
I
she
am
smiled.
the air.
She
I am
was
the
moving
solution.
forward.
I
The
am
train
yours.
lurched forward,
But the image of his
carrying
father
her away
smeared
from the
fast
past
in her mind,
and toward a future
the
she was
accusation
building
of
with her own
manipulation.
hands.
If she
She
told
didn't
him
know
now,
what challenges
the victory
lay
would be
ahead.
tainted. She knew there
It
would
had
be
to be
more late
earned.
nights, more
Don't wait
budgeting,
for me,
more struggles.
she said, not looking
But as
back.
the train sped through
Live
the
your
dark
life,
tunnel,
Lucas.
weeks of
Be
waking
happy.
up before dawn,
Elena,
of
he
packing
called out
simple
one
lunches
last plea.
in plastic containers,
She opened the door.
of
The
navigating
hallway
the
air was
crowded
cold.
streets without a
Goodbye,
driver to
Lucas.
open the door. She stepped out
feet
and closed
ached
the
in
door.
shoes that were
The
no
click of
longer
the latch
broken in
was
by
the
servants,
loudest sound she had ever
and her
heard.
eyes strained
It sealed
from
the glow
past.
of computer screens.
She stood in
that
the
lacked
hallway for a
filters
moment,
of high-end
listening.
luxury. She heard nothing.
But every morning, no
As she
footsteps,
stepped off the train
no
and
cries,
walked the 4 blocks
just
to the
silence.
office building,
He was respecting
she felt
her
a
wish.
surge of energy.
He was
that
letting
she
her
hadn't
go.
felt in years.
Elena walked to the
It was
elevator.
the energy of purpose.
Her legs felt like lead.
The cold wind bit
She
at
pressed
her
the button
cheeks,
and
but she
waited.
didn't mind.
When the doors
It
opened,
felt real. She stepped
It
inside
felt like
and
waking
turned
up.
around. The office
door
of
to their
Sterling
apartment
and
was still
Associates was
closed.
modest. She wondered if he was standing on the other side of building that smelled of old paper just like brewed coffee. As the elevator descended, no marble floors, tears, no chandeliers, no staff. She cried for the love she was leaving behind. Just rows of cubicles. She cried for the pain she was causing and the quiet intensity of people working to keep resolve was hard afloat. She was no longer just Elena the watchmaker. A partitioned space. She was Elena with a flickering fluorescent light above. And she had work to do. Her computer screen displayed rows of spreadsheets. The rain had stopped, complex grids of numbers that represented the financial lives of dozens of clients. A black car was waiting for her around the corner. To anyone else, it might have looked like Quetzal Data. She had called him 10 minutes ago. It looked like a puzzle waiting to be solved. Where to, Ms. Vance? She took a sip of her coffee. The driver asked. The taste bitter. Elena looked at the apartment, opened the file one last time through the tinted window. Sarah, her supervisor, she could see a light on in their window. Walked by and dropped a thick folder on her desk. Alone. The Henderson portfolio, she said. Sarah voice clear and steady, but kind. Vance Global headquarters. Senior analysts think it's stable. As you wish, but I want a second pair of eyes. From the curb. Someone who hasn't watched the apartment building shrink in the distance. Can you review the asset allocation by Friday? She touched the pocket nodded, her phone opening the file. She would not call. I'll look at it. As the day progressed, the office emptied out. She would rise. Colleagues left to pick up when the time was right to meet friends. When the Sterlings were on their knees and Lucas was standing tall on his own. She ordered a salad from the place downstairs, not as the girl they disowned. Her eyes but as the woman who owned the world they lived in. She remembered the days when she had managed Arthur's private investments. Elena wiped her eyes and straightened her spine. She had a knack for seeing patterns in the volatility. She opened her laptop on the seat beside her. That skill had lain low in the dark car, buried under layers of social obligations, proposals, and domestic management, mergers. Now it was waking up, sharp and hungry. The Sterling Company was scrolled through the Henderson data. The anonymous help she real estate holdings, tech stocks, bonds. They would feel the pinch. Everything looked balanced. She typed a command, but Elena dug deeper. She cross-referenced the acquisition dates. She was doing this to clear the board. She noticed a cluster of investments in an emerging biotech and Lucas met again that had been hyped 2 years ago, but had since stagnated. No secrets. The senior analysts had marked them as long-term holds. Just 2 people who had survived the storm. Elena saw something else. The car moved deeper into the financial district. The maintenance costs the towering skyscraper outweighing the potential growth. Elena watched them rise, dragging down the liquidity of the entire portfolio. Soon, one of them would bear her name. Flew across the keyboard. She thought of Lucas. She pulled up alternative investment vehicles. She hoped he was dreaming of something better, offered steady growth. I'm sorry, without the volatility. She whispered to the empty car. She ran the simulation. But you'll understand one day. The numbers danced on the screen. The driver didn't respond. Red turning to green. He simply drove on. They divested from the biotech stagnation to the future and reallocated Elena to a diversified mix of utilities. The separation was complete. The client would see a 12% increase in yield. She was the heir they needed. It wasn't flashy. She wouldn't give them what they wanted. It wasn't the kind of high-risk gamble Arthur loved to make to impress his peers. And neither would Lucas. They would both rise from the ashes of this breakup. It was smart, sharper. The office grew dark around her. As the car stopped at a red light, crew started vacuuming. Elena caught her reflection in the window. The sound muffled by the walls. The sadness didn't notice the time, but so was the power. She was in a flow state. The girl who had walked into the Sterling mansion concentration where the world outside ceased to exist. The woman who walked out of there was no mansion, no Arthur, no Vanessa. There was only the logic of the market and into the black truth of the numbers. The city had changed for the first time since leaving, shifting from the damp chill of autumn to the crisp bite of winter. She felt like an architect, and now into the building something real. Spring. At 8 o'clock, inside the towering glass headquarters of Vance Global, she stopped when she saw Elena controlled, constant, and cold. You're still here? Elena stood by the floor-to-ceiling window, turning her monitor slightly, looking down Henderson at the streets far below. The biotech holdings are draining liquidity. The people invisible. I've modeled a reallocation strategy. The world looked manageable. It reduces risk, organized, and increases yield. Nothing like the Sarah messy, leaned in, painful reality of the life she had left behind. She was silent for a long moment. She turned away from the window. Then she looked at Elena, a smile breaking across her face. She wore a suit now, the tailored and sharp. A far cry from the headline dress she had worn to not the underlying cash flow. Her hair was pulled back, her posture rigid. This is excellent work, Elena. She looked like a CEO. Thank you. She felt like a ghost, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. A voice came from the intercom. It wasn't praise for her dress, the board is assembled, hosting skills. Elena took a deep breath, steadying her hands. It was praise for her mind. I'm coming. Present the boardroom was a cavern of polished mahogany and soft lighting. If they approve it, we'll implement 12 men and women sat around the table, bonus tied all to successful portfolio all seasoned veterans of the industry. Elena nodded when she entered, shutting down her computer. The conversation died instantly. She walked out of the building. There was still skepticism in the room. The city was still alive. Cars humming along the wet streets. They did not see the air. She took a deep breath. They saw the girl. The bonus. They remembered the quiet beneficiary, not compared to the alimony she could have fought for. They did not know about the watchmaker's daughter. Not given the value of the next day, the presentation Elena took her seat at the head of the senior analysts. She placed a single folder of the new hire. Were silenced by the clarity of her data. Her voice was calm. She spoke with confidence, effortlessly to the back of the room, explaining the risks. Let's discuss the quarterly acquisitions. She wasn't a shy wife and the senior board member. She was a professional. Throat. When the meeting ended, her
his
colleague
hands
Mark
clasped.
shook her hand.
Ms. Vance, with
welcome
all
to
due
the team,
respect,
Elena.
some of us are
Really?
concerned about your
That was
strategy
impressive.
regarding the
2
Sterling
weeks later, the
Industries
check
debt.
arrived. You've been
It was
buying their
direct
bonds
deposited
aggressively
into her personal
but you haven't
account.
called in the default.
Elena sat at her
You're
small
holding a
kitchen
losing
table,
hand.
logging
Why?
into her banking
Elena
app.
opened the folder.
She watched the numbers
She
update.
didn't look at Henderson
Her savings
immediately.
balance grew.
She let the
It was a
silence
modest
stretch,
sum,
just for
but
a
it
moment,
represented
something
asserting her
far
control.
greater than the amount.
It's not a losing
It was seed
hand,
capital.
Mr. Henderson.
It was the
It's an
foundation of
investment
her
in
instability.
stability.
If
She
Sterling
opened a new
collapses,
tab on her browser.
it creates a vacuum
Navigating
in the
to
market.
an investment
Competitors
platform
will
she had
rush in.
researched.
Prices
She wasn't going to let
volatility.
this money sit
By
idle.
holding the debt, she was
We
going to make
control
it
the
work
pace
for
of their
her.
restructuring.
She selected a
But you're
low-cost
propping up a
index fund,
competitor,
the
Henderson
same
pressed.
type she had recommended
It doesn't
for
make
the
financial
Henderson
sense.
portfolio. Unless
She
there's
typed
something
in the
else.
amount to invest.
Elena looked up.
Her finger
meeting
hovered
his
over the
gaze.
confirm button.
Her eyes were steady.
This was the moment.
Business is not
She was
just
putting
about
her own
numbers.
money on the line.
It's about ecosystems.
No Arthur to blame if
we
it
don't
went
want
wrong.
a dead competitor.
No safety net.
We want a partner
Just
who
her
knows their
judgment.
place. She clicked.
She slid a document.
The confirmation
across the
screen
table.
loaded. Here are the
Investment
projections.
successful.
By Q4,
She leaned back in
our
her
holding
chair.
in sterling
A
will
quiet
give us
laugh
voting
escaping
rights
her
on their
lips.
board.
She
We
was
won't
an
destroy
investor
them.
now.
We will
Not by
refine them.
marriage, but by
And
merit.
in doing so,
Miles
we secure
away,
our own supply
in the towering
chain.
glass office
It was
of
a half
Sterling
truth.
Industries.
The logic
Arthur
was
sat
sound,
in a
the
meeting that was
projections
going
accurate.
poorly.
But the
board
motivation
members
was
stared
buried
at him
deep
across the
beneath
long
layers
table,
of corporate
their
speak.
expressions grim.
She wasn't doing
The
this
quarterly
for the supply
projections
chain.
are off again, Arthur.
She was doing it to
One of
ensure
them
that when
said,
Lucas
tapping
finally
a pen
stood up,
against the table.
the ground beneath
You
him
invested
wouldn't
heavily
crumble.
in that venture
She was
capital
building a
fund.
safety net.
The
you
returns
didn't
aren't
know existed.
materializing.
Henderson
It's a long-term
studied the
play.
document.
Arthur
He looked at the
defended,
other
but his
board
voice
members.
lacked conviction.
They murmured
He was
among
tired.
themselves. The house
Finally,
finally.
Henderson nodded
Vanessa was
slowly.
constantly
Very
asking
well.
for money. The
For
strategy
trips.
holds.
For things he could no
Good,
longer afford
Elena
without
said,
dipping
closing
into
her
reserves.
Meeting
He had made a
adjourned.
rash investment
As the board
to try
members
and
filed
boost
out,
the stock price
Elena
quickly.
remained seated.
A gamble to
The
prove
adrenaline
he was
faded,
still the king of
leaving
the market.
behind the familiar
It was
ache in her
backfiring.
chest. We need
She had
stability.
won them over.
Not
She had
gambles,
proven her
the board
competence.
member said. But there was
We
no
need
one
someone
to
who
celebrate
understands
with.
risk management.
No one to share the victory.
Arthur thought of Elena.
She picked up her
He
phone
remembered
and
how she
scrolled
used
to
to
a
review
contact
his
she never
portfolios
called.
before he told her
Lucas.
to stop interfering.
She hovered over the name
She
for
had been
a second,
conservative,
then
careful.
locked the screen.
He had called it boring.
Later that evening,
Now boredom
the
looked
office
like
was
safety.
empty. He
The
looked
cleaning
down at
crew
his
moved
hands.
quietly in the
They were
halls.
shaking slightly.
Elena sat at
He
her
realized
desk.
he was surrounded
the
by
glow of
yes
the computer
men who were
monitor
too afraid to tell
illuminating
him
her
when he was
face.
wrong.
Hawthorne
Elena
sat
would
opposite
opposite
her,
her,
reviewing
would have
a
shown
stack
him
of
the
reports.
numbers.
I'll
The
review the
supplier
strategy,
agreement is finalized,
Arthur said quietly.
Hawthorne said.
See that
Sliding
you
a
do,
paper toward her.
the board member replied.
The small watch component
Arthur left the meeting
manufacturers
and
in
went
the
to his office.
district. He
We
closed
own
the
them
door
now.
and leaned against
Elena
it.
picked up the paper.
He pulled out his phone.
These were the
and
suppliers
scrolled to
Lucas
Elena's number
used.
again.
The
He
ones
didn't
his father
call.
had threatened
He
to
just
cut
looked
off.
at the name. Will they
He wondered
continue
what
to
she was
supply
doing.
Sterling's
He hoped she was
independent
okay.
retailers? He didn't know
Yes,
that she was
Hawthorne
sitting in a
confirmed.
small apartment
Under the new contract,
watching her own
they are
investments
obligated
grow,
to fulfill
building
all
a life
existing
that
orders.
didn't need him. No matter who
He didn't
places
know
them.
that the woman he had
Elena
cast
let out a
aside
breath.
was becoming
She didn't know she
stronger
was
than the
holding.
man who had thrown
Good.
her away.
Keep it anonymous.
Elena closed her laptop,
Use the shell
and stood
company.
up.
She
Elena
walked to the window
Hawthorne
of her
said,
apartment.
his tone shifting from
The city
lawyer to
lights
friend.
twinkled below.
How long can you
A
keep
sea
this
of
up?
possibilities.
You're running a global
She placed her
conglomerate
hand on
by
the
day
glass
and playing
She
guardian
wasn't
angel
looking
by
at the
night.
mansion anymore.
You haven't slept
She wasn't
more than
looking
4
back.
hours a night in
She was
months.
looking forward.
I sleep
The
enough.
seed was planted,
She said,
though
the
the
dark
roots were taking
circles under
hold.
her eyes betrayed
And soon
her.
she knew she
How
would
is he?
bloom.
Hawthorne
Not in his
hesitated.
shadow.
But
He
in
knew
her
how
own
dangerous
light,
this question
she
was.
turned away from the
He's
window
struggling
and began
The
to
shop is
prepare for
open.
tomorrow.
He's working
There was work
18-hour
to do.
days. There was a
He
feature
fixed
to
the roof
build.
himself when it
And for the
leaked.
first time in
He
her life,
refused a loan
she
from
was
his
the one
father's
holding the
associates
blueprint.
last week.
The night settled
proud,
over the
Elena,
city,
He's
covering
doing
it
both
all
the
on his
mansion
own.
and the
A
apartment
smile
in the
touched
same
Elena's
darkness.
lips,
Sad and proud.
but inside the small
He
room,
always was
there was
stubborn.
a light on.
He asks about
It was
you,
a small
Hawthorne
lamp,
added softly.
casting a warm glow
Not
over
directly,
the desk. But I hear
Elena
things.
sat there.
He tells
reading a
clients
book on
he's
computer
waiting for a
monitors,
specific
casting
part.
a ghostly
A
pallor
rare
on
spring.
his face.
He says it takes
the numbers
time
on
to
the
find
screens
right
were
fit.
red.
A
Elena
sea of
looked
warning
down at her
signs
hands
that he desperately
They were
tried to
manicured
ignore.
now smooth.
He rubbed
but
his
she
temples,
remembered the oil
the headache
stains,
that had
the
taken
calluses from
residence
the tools.
behind his eyes,
Tell me
throbbing
he's
in
eating.
time
with his heart.
He's alive, Hawthorne
He needed
said.
a win.
But he's
He
lonely.
needed something to show
We
the
all
board,
are.
to show
Elena
himself.
stood up,
and
he
walked
was still
back to
the master
window.
of his destiny.
The city lights
The door
twinkled
to the
like
study
distant
opened
stars.
without a knock.
I can't go back
Vanessa
yet,
walked
Hawthorne,
in, holding a
Not
tablet.
until the merger
She
is
was
complete.
dressed in a vibrant silk
Not until
dress
his father
that seemed
understands
too bright
that
for the
power
dim room.
isn't inherited.
A splash of
It's
color
earned.
against the gloom.
If I go back now,
she didn't notice
Lucas
the tension
will always
in his
wonder if
shoulders.
he succeeded
Or
because
perhaps
of me.
she chose to
He
ignore
needs to
it.
know he can stand
She had her
alone.
own agenda,
And when he knows
one
the
that
truth,
required funding.
Hawthorne asked,
Arthur, darling,
when he knows you
she
own the
said,
ground,
her
he was
voice
standing
smooth.
on,
Lacking
then he'll
any
know I
trace
didn't
of the
save
concern
him,
he so desperately
Elena said,
needed.
her voice firm.
I've been looking at
I
the
just cleared
venues
the
for
path.
the charity gala.
He walked it.
The grand ballroom
She turned
is
back
available,
to the desk.
but we need to put
There's
down
the industry
deposit
summit
by
next
Friday.
week.
And I
The
found the
Sterlings will
perfect
be there.
designer for my dress.
They're desperate for new
It's
investors.
custom, obviously.
They don't know that
Arthur
the primary
didn't turn
investor
around.
is me.
He kept his
Are you
eyes on the
attending?
spreadsheet.
Yes,
Vanessa,
Elena
we
said.
talked about this.
It's time. We need to
The
cut
week
costs.
leading up to the summit,
The board
was
is
a
breathing
blur
down
of
my neck.
preparations.
I can't
Elena
authorize
chose
a
her
lavish
attire
gala right
carefully.
now.
not the humble dress of
closer.
the past, the heels of
Not
her
the
shoes
overly
clicking
aggressive
sharply
power
on
suit
the
of
hardwood
the
floor.
boardroom.
Something
She placed
elegant,
a hand on his shoulder,
something that
her
commanded
nails
respect
digging
without
slightly.
shouting. But the
She
gala is
practiced her
important
speech
for
in
your
the mirror,
image. Watching
If
her
you cancel,
own eyes.
people will talk.
She needed to be
They'll
cold
say
enough
Sterling
to be taken
Industries is
seriously,
struggling,
but warm
You can't
enough
let
to
them
be
see
trusted.
weakness, Arthur.
She needed to be
You
the
have to
heir they
project
needed.
strength, not the girl
It's not
they
about
rejected.
projection. It's
On the
about
morning of the
liquidity.
summit,
The
Arthur
air was
said,
crisp.
finally turning
The
to
venue
face
was a
her.
grand hotel
His
ballroom,
eyes were bloodshot,
filled with
his
the
patience
elite
fraying.
of the business world.
We don't have the cash flow
Chandeliers
for a custom
cast a
dress
warm
and a
glow
ballroom
over the
deposit.
crowd.
Not
Waiters
this month.
circulated with champagne.
Vanessa pulled her hand
Elena
away,
arrived
her
late,
expression cooling.
letting the buzz of the room
So what are you
build
saying?
before her entrance.
That you're broke?
She
I
stood
thought
in
you
the
were a
shadows of the
billionaire.
balcony. I thought this
overlooking
house
the
was
floor.
paid off. She saw them
I thought I was
immediately.
marrying into
Arthur
stability.
and Margaret Sterling
I am
stood near
stable,
the center,
Arthur lied,
surrounded
the
by a
words
group
tasting
of
like
potential
ash.
investors.
But cash is
They
tied
looked
up in
older than she
investments.
remembered.
I need time
The
for them
arrogance
to
was
mature.
still there, but
Then
it was
move
frayed
them,
at the edges.
Vanessa said simply.
Arthur's suit
As
was
if
slightly
moving
less
millions was
pristine.
as easy as
Margaret's
transferring
smile
money
didn't reach
between
her
checking
eyes.
accounts.
They were hunting.
There's that venture
and then she
capital
saw
fund
him.
you were looking at.
Lucas, the tech
He
startup,
stood slightly apart.
He said
from
it
his
had high
parents,
potential, holding a glass
Invest
of
in
water.
that.
When
He
it
looked
pays
tired.
out, we'll have
His
plenty
suit
for
was
the
the
gala.
same one he had
And
worn
for
to the
everything
dinner
else.
months ago.
Arthur
But he wore
hesitated
it with a new kind
the
of
tech
dignity.
startup was a risky venture.
He wasn't slouching.
It was
He
improved
wasn't
and
hiding.
volatile.
He was
Exactly the
listening.
kind of gamble
He was
the board
learning.
had warned him
Elena's
against.
heart hammered
But
against
Vanessa's
her
eyes
ribs.
were wide,
It took
expectant.
every ounce of her
She
willpower
looked at him not
to
with
run
love,
down the stairs,
but with
and throw her arms
expectation.
around him.
She wanted the
She gripped
lifestyle
the
she had
railing,
been
her knuckles
promised.
white.
She
Not
wanted
yet,
the
she told
validation of
herself.
being the woman
Watch.
who stood beside
The man
the
beside
powerful
her on the
Arthur
balcony
Sterling.
cleared his throat.
If he said no, she might
Impressive
leave.
turnout, isn't
If
it?
he said no,
Everyone
he
is
admitted
waiting
defeat.
for the keynote speaker.
His pride, that
The
stubborn,
mysterious
brittle
head of
thing that
Vantage
had cost him
Global.
his wife.
No one has
flared
seen
up.
her in public before.
He couldn't be the man who
Elena
couldn't
didn't
afford
look
a
at
party.
him.
Anticipation
man
is a
who was
powerful
told
tool.
no by his own
They say
partner.
she's ruthless.
Which fund?
The man continued.
Arthur asked, his
Bought
voice
out half
quiet.
the district's suppliers
Vanessa smiled,
overnight. The tension
Some say
vanishing
she's going to
instantly.
announce a merger
She tapped
with
the
Sterling
screen of her
today.
tablet. Save
This
them from
one.
bankruptcy.
Nexus Dynamics.
Elena finally looked at
They're
him.
launching a new
Or
AI
maybe she's going to
platform.
teach them how
It's
to
going to
save
revolutionize
themselves.
the market.
She checked her
My
watch.
friend's brother is
It
an
was
advisor.
time. She
He says it's
adjusted
a
her
guarantee.
jacket, took a deep
Arthur
breath,
looked at the
and
screen.
stepped out of the shadows.
The projections were optimistic.
She walked down the
overly
grand
so.
staircase.
They relied on
heels
best
clicking
case
rhythmically
scenarios
on
that
the
rarely
marble.
existed.
The sound
in
was
real
subtle,
world.
but
he
heads
wanted
began
to
to
believe.
turn.
He
There
needed
was
to
a presence
believe.
in the room
I'll
that
review the
shifted
details,
atmosphere.
he said.
People
Do it
stopped
quickly.
talking. Vanessa
Whispers
said,
rippled
leaning
through
down
the
to
crowd.
kiss his
Who is
cheek.
that?
Is
Her
that
perfume,
her?
that same
The
scent
Vancer?
of jasmine.
Elena
filled his
kept her eyes
nose.
forward.
It used to
She
smell
didn't
like
look at
the
the
Sterlings.
Sterlings. Now it
She
smelled
didn't
like
look at
pressure.
Lucas.
I want to
She
announce
walked
the
toward
gala
the
next
stage.
week.
As
She
she
left
ascended
the
the
room,
steps,
humming
she
softly.
felt the weight of the moment.
Arthur sat alone again.
This was the culmination
He looked
of
at the
months
Nexus
of
Dynamics
sleepless
file,
nights,
of
He
loneliness,
knew he should call his
of
financial
strategic
advisor.
maneuvering.
He knew
She
he
reached
should
the
run it
podium.
by the risk management
The microphone
team.
was adjusted,
But he
for her
remembered
height.
Elena.
She looked
She
out
would
at
have told
the
him
sea
to
of
walk
faces.
away.
She
He
would have
saw
shown
Arthur
him the
Sterling
fine print.
stiffen.
The thought
She
of
saw
her
Margaret's
advice
eyes
stung,
widen
so
slightly.
he pushed it away. And she saw
He
Lucas.
wouldn't let her ghost haunt
He was
his
staring at her,
decisions.
his glass
He would do
halfway
this his
to his
way.
mouth.
He would
He
prove
didn't
he didn't need
recognize
her
her at
caution.
first. He opened
The
the
woman on the
transfer
stage
interface.
was confident,
His finger
powerful,
hovered over the
radiant.
key.
She
He
was
thought
not
of
the
the
girl
girl
who had
skeptical
washed
faces.
dishes in A.
He thought of
Small
Vanessa's
apartment.
demanding eyes.
But then her
He
eyes
pressed
met
enter.
his.
The
Just
money
for a
was
second.
moved, and
A
she saw the
significant
flicker
portion
of
of the
recognition.
company's reserve
The confusion
capital
diverted
hope.
into a
Good
high-risk
evening,
account.
Elena
Arthur
said,
leaned
her
back,
voice amplifying
exhaling
through
a
the
breath
hall.
he didn't know
I am
he was
Elena
holding.
Vance.
He felt
Thank
a
you for
fleeting
coming.
sense of relief.
The room was silent.
Followed immediately
She
by a gnawing
paused,
dread
letting
in
her
the pit
name
of his
settle.
stomach. She saw
He turned
Arthur
off the
lean toward
monitors
Margaret
and sat in the
whispering
dark.
urgently.
2 weeks
They
later,
knew the
the
name
market
now.
shifted.
They knew the
It
power
wasn't a
it held.
crash, just
We
a
are gathered
correction,
here to
but it
discuss
was
the
enough.
future of our industry.
Nexus Dynamics
Elena
announced
continued.
a delay in their product
A future
launch.
built on innovation,
regulatory
resilience,
hurdles,
and integrity.
The stock value plummeted
Too often
by
we rely on
40%
legacy
in a single day.
We rely on names.
Arthur watched the
But
ticker
names
on
are
his
just
screen.
labels. His heart
Value
sinking
is
with
created
every
by
green
action.
arrow pointing down.
She glanced down at
The
her
reserve
notes,
capital
though
was
she
locked
didn't
in.
need them.
He couldn't
Tonight,
pull out
Vance
without
Global
realizing
is
a announcing a new initiative. The liquidity
partnership
crisis
program
he had tried
for
to avoid
independent
was now here.
retailers.
We believe in supporting those who build with their hands. His phone rang. Who fix what is
the
broken,
board chairman
who create value.
Arthur let
for
it go to
nothing.
voicemail.
She looked
He knew
directly
what the
at
call
Lucas
was about.
again.
He
Stood up
lowered
and
his
walked to
glass.
the window.
He was
The
standing
sky was
taller now.
overcast.
He
understood
understood
the turmoil inside
This wasn't
him.
just a business
He had tried to buy
announcement.
confidence.
It was a message.
And instead,
I
he
see
had
you.
purchased disaster.
I believe in you.
Downstairs,
We will not
he
be
could hear
acquiring
Vanessa on the
Sterling
phone.
Industries.
Her voice
Elena
was
said,
loud,
her voice
carrying
clear.
through the open
We
floor
will be
plan.
offering them a line of
No,
credit.
I don't care
Conditional
about
on
the deposit.
restructuring.
Tell them Arthur
Conditional
Sterling
on
will
merit.
pay. A
Just
murmur
hold the
went through
venue.
the crowd.
She paused.
Arthur
listening.
Sterling looked pale.
What do you mean budget
He had
cuts?
expected a takeover.
He's just being careful.
He had expected
Don't worry
destruction.
about it.
Instead,
Arthur walked
he
to
was
the
being
top of the
offered a
stairs
lifeline,
and looked down.
but one that came
Vanessa
with
was
strings.
pacing in the foyer,
Strings that
gesturing
gestured
wildly.
change.
She
Elena
wasn't
stepped
worried
back
about
from
the
the
podium.
podium.
She
The
was
applause
worried about
began
her
slow
event.
at first. Then
She was
roaring.
worried about her image.
She didn't smile.
The realization
She nodded
hit him
politely
with the
and
force
walked
of
off
a
the
physical
stage.
blow.
She didn't stop for
partner.
interviews. She was a passenger.
She didn't stop for handshakes.
And she was demanding he drive faster even as the engine smoked. She knew Lucas would follow. He walked down the stairs. She knew the questions would come. Vanessa saw
the secret
him
was
and
out.
hung up the phone.
The game had changed.
There you are. She pushed open the heavy doors, but we need to order the cool night air of the hotel. I was thinking of 5-course meal. She walked to the railing, nothing less, looking out at the city. Vanessa, she heard the door open behind her. We have a problem. The next investment, then fast down. Elena, significant losses. The voice broke her heart. We need to cancel the gala. She turned around. We need to cut everything. Stood there, breathing Vanessa's heavily. Face hardened, as if he had run mask all of the supportive partner slipped. He looked at her, the entitlement searching her face, trying to reconcile the woman in the power suit. I've already told everyone who had left him in the rain. My friends, the press. He whispered. If you cancel now, it looks like you're the investor. Is that what this is? Elena nodded. Failing, Arthur? She didn't try to hide to save the company. Yes, Arthur said, his voice all this time, Lucas because said, of the investment you told me to make. I told you to look at it. You knew everything. Vanessa countered, and you let shifting the blame. You let me struggle. I let you the decision. Elena corrected gently. Don't put this on me. I couldn't give you the answer. I'm just trying to maintain our status. You had to find it yourself. If you lose that, if I had told you, you would have never known if you were strong enough. The question hung in the air. Lucas took a step closer. What do we have? The anger was there, around the mansion, but it was mixed with awe. The gold fixtures, the marble floors, the art on the walls. You saved the shop. It was all just stuff. I saved the business, without the respect. You saved yourself, and without Elena, your father's empty. You worked 18-hour days. That he had traded substance. You kept your integrity. That was traded a partner who cared about his soul for Lucas shook his head, cared about his tears welling in his eyes. We have a mess. Why didn't you tell me quietly? Why did you leave? And I have to clean it up because I needed you to know that I wasn't leaving. Walked past her into the living room, her voice poured a drink. I was hand shook as he lifted the glass. I needed to become someone who could stand beside you without overshadowing you. He thought about Elena. I needed to be your equal. She was out there somewhere, not your savior, working, building, not your burden. She wasn't worrying about galas or custom dresses. He reached out, worrying his hand hovering near her face, and she was winning. Afraid she might disappear. He could feel it in his bones. You're still Elena. While he was digging a hole, she was climbing a mountain. And I'm still yours. The phone rang again. If you'll have me, the board chairman. Lucas let out a sob. This time, a sound of pure relief. He listened to the voice on the other end. He held her tightly, as if he were afraid the wind would blow her away. They wanted explanations. Elena buried her face. They wanted to know why the reserves were depleted. Breathing in the scent of him. Arthur looked at Vanessa. It was the same scent now scrolling through her phone. Soap and wood and seemingly unbothered. I hated you. Crisis. He whispered into her. I'll be there, Arthur said. For a while. He hung up. I hated that you left. He finished the drink, but I never stopped loving you. The decline had begun, Elena said. It wasn't a sudden crash, but a slow erosion. I never stopped water wearing away. They stood on the terrace, and he was the one holding the water, while the party set the glass down. Chauffeur had been let go yesterday to cut costs. The Sterlings were still inside. The silence of the engine grappling cut out was deafening. The market would still fluctuate tomorrow that had become his constant companion. But in this moment, none of that mattered. He sat there for a moment. The secret was out, gripping the steering wheel. The barrier was gone. His knuckles white. They were no longer the air and the watchmaker. He had to face the music. They were just two people, but the house no longer felt like home through the dark. It felt like a set for a play that had ended badly. It's going to be hard. Beginning to look cheap under the harsh light of reality. Let him not like the front door, Lucas said. The foyer was dim. I don't work for him anymore. Motion sensor lights flickering. I work for us. The wiring was failing. Elena smiled. Another sign of smile that reached her eyes for the first time in months. He dropped his briefcase on the console table. To the apartment, it landed with a heavy thud that echoed through the empty hallway. Taking his hand. He loosened his tie. To the shop. The silk feeling like a noose around his neck. Maybe we can look for a new place. He could hear somewhere with a bigger window. Lucas laughed, a sound of pure joy. The rustle of paper. Yeah. He took a deep breath. We can do that. Stealing himself. They walked back toward the entrance, hand in hand. His shoes sinking into the carpet. The doorman opened the door that hadn't been vacuumed. As they stepped back into the light, Vanessa was standing by the fireplace. At the terrace one last time. She wasn't packing yet. The shadows were gone. She was holding a glass of wine. The secrets were gone. All that was left, he kept her head slightly and saw Lucas sleeping. She turned as he entered. Her expression unsteady. His face relaxed in a way she hadn't seen since before, but it was empty. The events of the previous night felt like a predator sensing weakness. The revelation. The board called me. Leaned forward, she said before he could speak. The technical assessment I just completed shows a 40% reduction, lacking the melodic warmth she used when she wanted something. That's not about liquidity. That's engineering. They mentioned asset liquidation. I've worked the floor. Arthur walked to the bar, needing the distance between them. The shareholders looked shield of the mahogany counter. They knew him as the son. They mentioned a lot of things. They're worried here. I'm advocating for Elena's plan. Working on it. Shifted the dynamic. Repeated. It wasn't just an outsider imposing crystal glass clinked against. It was an insider validating. Does that mean my allowance Henderson looked between them because my card stand together on this morning. We stand together. Elena. It was embarrassing, Arthur. Or we all fall separately. Arthur closed his eyes for a second. The choice is yours. The headache. There was a long pause. Pulsing. Finally, I froze the secondary accounts. Very well. I told you we need to conserve cash. The restructuring. Every dollar counts. As they left the room, Elena let out a breath she had been holding. Said. That was setting close, the glass down on the mantle with a sharp click that sounded like a gavel striking. But you didn't have to do it alone. Without telling me. I'm learning that. After everything I've done for you. Over the next few weeks, I stood by the rhythm of their life was settled into a new pattern. Elena wasn't undermining
days,
me, often late
Arthur
into the
said,
night.
the defense
Elena's
automatic, though it
reputation
lacked
in the
heat.
market solidified.
He was too tired to fight
She
the
wasn't
old
just
battles.
the heir.
She
And you
was
didn't
the
stand by
architect
me.
of the turnaround.
You stood next to me.
Articles were written
There's a
about
difference.
her strategic genius.
Vanessa walked toward him.
They praised her vision,
her heels
her grit.
clicking on the parquet
They didn't
floor.
know about the
Each
sleepless
step
nights,
measured
the
threat.
doubts.
Don't
The
rewrite
tears shed in
history,
the car
Arthur.
on the way to the
You
office.
wanted me. You
But
chose
Lucas
me.
knew.
You kicked
One
her out
evening,
so I could
they
be
stayed
here.
late at the office.
And now that things are
The
tough,
city lights
you want to
twinkled
cut me
below.
off?
You
Elena
want me
was
to
reviewing
struggle
a
while
final
you figure out
report
your mess
on the Sterling merger.
I want to save the
It was
company,
complete.
Arthur said.
The company
turning
was
to face
saved,
her,
his
restructured
hands
and
gripping the
poised
edge
for
of the
growth.
bar.
She
If the
closed
company
the
goes
folder
under,
and leaned
there's
back
no
in
money.
her chair.
For you,
It's
for
done,
me, for
she
anyone.
said.
Don't
Lucas
you understand
looked up
that?
from his own work.
It's not about punishment.
What happens now?
It's about
Now,
survival.
Elena said.
I understand that I
Standing
have
up and
nothing in
walking
my
to the
name.
window, Vanessa said.
We decide
her
what
eyes
we
narrowing.
want.
The
The
mask
company is
slipping to
stable.
reveal the cold
I don't need to be
calculation
here
beneath.
18 hours a day
I
anymore.
understand that if you go
Do you want to
bankrupt,
step back?
I walk away with
Lucas
nothing.
asked, coming to
No
stand
house,
beside her.
no security.
I want to live, no
Elena
future.
said.
I
spent
invested
so
my
much
time
in you,
building
Arthur.
a future that
I expect
forgot
a
to be
return.
present in the
You
present.
knew the risks.
I want to
Arthur
fix
said,
watches
his
again.
voice rising
I
slightly.
want to cook dinner. We never
I
signed
want
a
to walk
prenup
in the
for
park
us
without
because you
checking
said
my
trust
phone.
was enough.
Lucas smiled.
You said love was enough.
I can arrange that.
Trust is
The
for
shop
people
is
who
still
have
there.
nothing to lose.
It's quiet without
Vanessa
you, though.
countered sharply.
It won't be anymore.
She reached into her
Elena
handbag
promised.
and pulled
She
out a
turned to
folded
face him.
document. But I need
She
you to
held it out to
understand
him.
something. Her arm
I will
extended
always
like
have
an
this
offering
power.
or a weapon.
The money, the influence.
I had my lawyer draw this
It's
up.
part of me now.
Transfer of
I
ownership.
can't give it back.
The guest
Will
cottage.
that bother you?
And the
Lucas
safe
thought
deposit
for a
box
moment.
contents. He looked out at
Specifically
the
the
city, then
jewelry
back at her.
collection.
It bothered
Arthur
me
looked
when
at
it
the
was a
paper,
secret,
but didn't take
It
it.
bothered me
The
when I
words
felt
swam
powerless.
before his eyes.
But now,
The
now
jewelry
it's just
belongs
a tool.
to the family.
Like a hammer.
It's Elena's.
It depends on who
It was her
holds
grandmother's.
You hold it with care.
She's not here.
So no, it
Vanessa
doesn't
said,
bother
her
me.
voice devoid
As
of
long as
empathy.
we hold it together.
She left.
Elena
She
felt a
abandoned
tear
you.
slip down her cheek.
She doesn't deserve it.
She wiped it away
I'm
quickly.
here.
I'm the
You
one
have no
dealing
idea
with the
how much I
stress.
needed to hear that.
I'm the one holding your
I think I
hand
do,
while the world falls
Lucas
apart,
said, pulling her into
I
a
deserve
hug.
compensation
Because
for the
I needed
risk.
to say it.
Arthur felt a
stayed
surge
like
of
that
nausea,
for a while,
physical,
watching
and
the city
overwhelming.
breathe below
He
them.
looked at Vanessa.
The rise was
really
complete,
looked at her,
not
and
just
saw
the
the rise of
stranger she
Elena
had always
Vance in the
been.
market. There was
But
no
the
love
rise
in
of
her
their
eyes.
partnership.
No concern
They had
for his
navigated
health,
the
his
storm,
sleep, his sanity.
survived the
Only
separation,
concern for the
and emerged
assets.
stronger.
Only
The
concern
market
for the
respected
value
Elena
of the
now,
collateral.
not because
He
of her
remembered the
name,
night Elena
but because
left.
of her work.
He remembered her
And
standing
Lucas
on the
respected
porch
her
in the
not
cold.
because of her power.
She had taken
but
nothing
because of her heart.
She had walked into
The next
rain
morning,
with only
Elena
what she
made
could
a
carry.
decision.
She had
called
protected his
Hawthorne,
dignity.
I'm
even
stepping
as he
down as
destroyed
CEO,
hers.
she said.
She had left the
Ms.
jewelry
Vance,
box on the dresser.
Hawthorne sounded
untouched.
shocked. The
And
stock
this
will
woman,
plummet.
this woman he
No,
had
it
chosen
won't,
over
Elena
her,
said.
was trying
I'm
to
appointing
strip
the
the board
board
of
of
directors
directors
while the house
I'm
was
staying
still
as chairman.
burning.
She
I want to
was leading
focus
the
on
ship while
strategy,
it was sinking.
not operations.
You think I'm going to
And
sign
I want to
over
reopen
family
the watch
heirlooms
shop
to you?
as a subsidiary.
Arthur asked,
a
his
training
voice
ground
low,
for engineers,
trembling with a mixture of
That's
rage
unconventional,
and despair.
Hawthorne
While I'm
noted.
fighting to keep
It's
the lights
personal,
on, Elena said.
While I'm trying to not
make
lose
it happen.
everything. She hung
I
up
think you're
and
going
looked
to
at
sign
Lucas.
it because you need me
I'm
to
coming
stay
back
quiet.
to the shop,
Vanessa said.
part-time. Her voice
You okay
dropping
with
to
that?
a dangerous
Lucas
whisper.
laughed, a
She
sound
stepped
of pure
closer,
relief.
invading his
I think I
space.
can manage.
I know about
They
the
left the
Nexus
office
deal,
together.
Arthur.
I
Not
know
in the
you
black
moved
car,
reserves
but
without
walking
board
to the
approval.
subway station.
I
like
know you
everyone
gambled the
else.
company's future
They
on
blended
the tip
into
I
the
gave
crowd.
you.
If I
faces
leave,
among
and
many.
I happen to mention
But as
that
they
to the
walked,
press,
Elena
or the
held her head
SEC,
high.
Your
She
stock
had
won't
conquered
just
the
drop.
world of giants.
It will vanish.
But she was returning
You'll be
to the
finished.
world of small
The
things.
threat landed like a
She had
physical
proven
blow.
she could be the heir they
Arthur
needed.
staggered back a
But
step,
more importantly,
hitting the bar.
she had proven
the
she could be
glassware
the
rattled
woman she
behind
wanted
him.
to be.
He looked
The
at her with
suspense of the
disbelief,
secret was
his
gone.
breath catching
The
in his
drama of the
throat.
conflict was
You're
resolved.
threatening me, but
You're
the story
blackmailing
wasn't
me.
over.
After
It was just entering
everything
a new
I gave
chapter.
you.
One
I'm
written
securing
not
my
in
future,
boardrooms or mansions,
Vanessa said coldly,
but
her
in the
face
quiet
impassive.
moments of a life
You
built
taught
on
me that,
truth.
Arthur.
As they
You taught me
descended
that
into the
everyone is
subway
out for
station,
themselves,
hand in
You
hand.
taught me that love
Elena
is
knew
secondary
that no
to
matter
success.
what challenges came
You
next,
taught me that business
they
is
would
business.
face them with the same
I'm just
resilience
applying the
that had
lesson.
in the modest coat
Arthur felt
controlled
something
a significant
inside him.
portion of the market
Not his
they
heart,
worked in. That had
They
broken
smiled at
months
each
ago
other.
when Elena
A
walked
private
out. secret shared
This was something
in a public
else.
Space.
His pride.
But while their world was
illusion.
stabilizing,
The last
another
shred of
world,
belief that he
one
could
built
control
on
this
glass
narrative
and arrogance, was
that he could
beginning
buy
to
loyalty.
crack.
Miles
He looked
away,
at the document in her
in
hand.
the sterile silence
It was a
of the
contract
Sterling
for his
Industries
soul.
executive office.
Sign it.
The
and
air
he
was
loses
thick
the
with
last
tension.
connection to his family.
Arthur
history.
Sterling stood by
Don't
the window,
sign it.
and she
looking out at the
exposes him.
same skyline.
But then he
Elena
thought of
had
Elena.
just admired.
He thought of the
But
way
where
she
had
saw
looked at him on the
opportunity.
porch.
He saw a threat.
The lights of the city
She had
seemed
chosen
to be mocking
dignity
him,
over security.
twinkling like eyes.
She had
watching
chosen
his
integrity
failure.
over comfort.
On his desk lay
Could he
a
do
thick
any less?
report bound in blue
Could he
leather.
sink so low
The
that he
Vance
bribed
Global
a blackmailing
logo was
Mistress
embossed on
with
his
his wife's
cover.
inheritance?
It was the
Could he become the man
restructuring
she
plan.
thought he was?
The lifeline.
No, Arthur said.
But to Arthur,
The
it
word
felt
was
like
quiet,
a death warrant.
but it felt heavy.
Margaret sat
Vanessa's
on the leather
eyes
sofa
widened.
in the corner of the
What?
room.
No,
Her posture rigid.
Arthur said again,
She
stronger
held a
this
cup
time.
of tea that had
He
gone
pushed off
cold
the bar
20
and
minutes
stood
ago.
straight.
She hadn't taken a
shoulders.
sip. The silence between them was heavy,
and I won't be blackmailed
laden
by
with
you.
the unspoken
You're a
acknowledgement
fool,
of their
Vanessa's
diminished
spat,
status.
her composure cracking.
They were no longer the
You'll
masters
lose
of this
everything.
domain. You'll be nothing.
They were tenants.
Maybe. Have you read
Arthur
the
said,
terms?
his voice steady.
Arthur asked,
but I
his
won't
voice
lose
low,
myself.
lacking the
Not
commanding
again.
boom it once had.
I've lost enough.
He didn't turn around.
Vanessa stared at him
I scanned
for a long
them,
moment.
Margaret replied.
The
her
silence
voice tight.
stretched.
They
filled
retained
only by
voting
the sound of the
control
rain
on all
lashing
major
against the
decisions.
windows.
We are
Then she
consultants.
laughed, a bitter,
in our own
harsh
company.
sound that echoed in
Arthur
the empty
turned
room.
slowly. She threw
His
the
face
document
looked older
onto the
than it had a
floor.
year ago.
Fine. The lines
Keep your
around his
jewelry.
mouth were deeper.
Keep your crumbling
etched by
empire.
months of sleepless
But don't
nights
expect me to
and
be
the constant
here
fear
when the
of the
bailiffs
phone
come.
ringing with bad
Don't
news.
expect me to wait for the
Consultants,
crash.
he repeated,
She zipped
the
the
word
suitcase
tasting
shut
bitter.
with a violent
We built
tug.
this empire. She grabbed the
My
handle
father
and
walked
his
past
father
him.
before him. She didn't look
And
back.
now we are advisors
She didn't
to
say
a girl
goodbye.
who fixes watches.
She just walked out the front
She
door.
is not just a
into
girl
the
who
rain,
fixes watches,
leaving it
Arthur.
slightly ajar.
Margaret said.
The wind
though she
blew
hated
into the
admitting
hallway,
it.
chilling
You
the
saw
air.
the summit.
Arthur
You
stood
saw
in
the
the
numbers.
hallway. She
Listening
listened
to
to
the
the sound of her
liquidation.
car engines
The
starting
banks were calling
and
in the
fading
loans.
away.
Then
we had
silence.
nowhere else to turn.
True silence.
We had dignity.
He walked to the
Arthur
door and
snapped.
closed it.
Walking
He
over
locked
to the
it.
desk and
He walked
slamming
over
his
to the
hand down
document
on the
report
floor and picked
We had
it
legacy.
Up. He walked
we
to
have
the
charity.
fireplace.
Do you
where
think
a
the
fire had been
shareholders
lit
respect
earlier,
us
but
now?
had now died
Do you
down
think
to
the market
embers?
sees us as
He
leaders?
tossed the paper into
They
the
see us
grate.
as survivors.
He watched it curl
There is
and
a
burn.
difference.
The edges
Margaret
turning to
stood up
ash and walked
the
over
ink
to him.
dissolving into smoke.
She placed a hand on
He
his
walked
arm,
to the safe,
but he
behind
shrugged
the
it off
painting in his
gently.
study.
She
He
understood
opened
his
it.
pain. The jewelry
It was
box
the
was
pain
there,
of
velvet
irrelevance.
and dark. For decades,
He opened it.
Their name
The
had
diamonds
opened doors.
sparkled in the dim light.
Now it was the reason
Elena's
doors
necklace.
were closing.
Her
The
earrings.
decline wasn't just
He had
financial.
left them there.
It was
thinking she would
existential.
come back for them.
They were becoming
She
ghosts
never had.
in their own machine.
He closed the box and
Lucas
put it
is
back.
happy. He
Margaret
wouldn't sell
said
them
softly.
He
trying
wouldn't
to
give them
find
to
to Vanessa.
silver lining. He would keep
Have
them.
you seen him?
Not for
He looks
himself,
alive,
but because they
He
were the
stands
only
beside
honest
her.
thing left in
They
the
are a
house.
team.
He went
Lucas
back
is
to the living
bewitched,
room and
Arthur
sat on the
said,
sofa,
pouring himself
the
a
room
drink
was
from
messy.
the decanter on
the
the
wine
sideboard.
glass on the mantel.
His hand shook slightly.
The shattered crystal
He
from
thinks this
earlier
is a
still on the
partnership.
floor. He doesn't
hadn't
see that he
cleaned
is
it.
merely the
He looked at
consort
the
to the
mess.
queen. His life
He has
was a
lost
mess,
his birthright,
but for the
Margaret.
first time,
And he smiles while it
mess.
happens.
He hadn't
Perhaps
shifted
he
the
realized
blame.
the birthright
He
was
hadn't
a cage,
signed away his
Margaret
integrity.
murmured.
He
More
was
to
alone.
herself than to him.
He was broke. She walked to
He
the
was
window
potentially
and
ruined.
looked down at the street.
But he was honest.
Traffic moved
He
slowly
leaned his
below.
head back and
We
closed
pushed
his
him away.
eyes.
We
The
pushed
rain
her
tapped
away.
against the window.
We thought we were
He thought of
protecting the
Elena.
company. He wondered
Instead,
where she was
we nearly
sleeping.
destroyed it.
He wondered if she
Maybe.
was warm. Maybe this
He
is
hoped
the
she was
correction
proud of
we needed.
herself.
Arthur
He knew
took
he
a
should
sip
have
of the
been
whiskey,
proud of her all along.
the burn doing
A
little
tear
to
slipped
warm
down
the
his
cold
cheek,
knot in his stomach.
tracking through the stubble
Correction?
on his face.
Is that what you call
didn't
this
wipe it away.
humiliation? He let it
I
fall.
walk into the boardroom
It was the
now,
first honest
and I
thing
see
he had
Henderson
done all
looking
day.
at me with
The
pity.
mansion settled
Pity,
around
Margaret,
him, creaking in
I would
the
have
wind.
preferred anger.
It was just a house
Anger
now.
I could fight.
Just wood and
Pity
stone.
is final.
The dream
He
was
walked
over.
back to the desk
The reality
and
had
opened the
begun.
report again.
And in the
He
quiet
flipped through the
darkness,
pages.
each
Arthur
one
Sterling
detailing
finally
a change
began
in
to
protocol,
understand the cost
a shift
of what
in
he had
authority,
thrown away.
a new
He
oversight
sat there
committee.
until the sun began
Look at
to
this,
rise,
he said,
gray and
pointing to
pale,
a clause.
shooting down his spine.
Quarterly audits by
He had
advanced
fallen
global
asleep in his
representatives.
clothes.
The
They
fabric
will be in our
wrinkled
books,
and smelling of
in our
stale
files.
smoke and sweat. They will know every
The fire in the
secret,
grate was
every
nothing but
weakness.
gray ash.
They already
cold to
know,
the touch.
Margaret said.
For a moment,
They know we were
as he
reckless.
blinked against the glare.
They know we
he
ignored the
forgot
market
where he
shifts.
was.
They know
He
we
forgot that
valued
Vanessa
status
was
over
gone.
solvency.
He forgot that
Arthur
the bank was
slumped into his
calling.
chair.
He forgot
The
that he
energy
was
seemed to
alone.
drain out of
Then
him.
the memory rushed
leaving
back
him
like a
looking
tidal
small.
wave.
I wanted
crushing
to
the
leave
brief
something
respite
for him,
of sleep.
he whispered, his
He
voice
sat up,
breaking.
rubbing his face,
For Lucas,
his hands trembling
I wanted him
slightly.
to have what I had.
The silence of the
a name
house
that
was
meant
no
something.
longer peaceful.
A foundation
It was
that couldn't be
predatory.
shaken. It waited
You
for
gave him a
to make
name,
mistake,
Margaret said.
His
Coming
phone
to
buzzed
stand
on the
behind
coffee
him.
table. She rested
The
her
screen
hands
lit up
on his
with the name
shoulders.
he had been dreading.
But you tried to give him
Henderson
a chain.
Private Bank.
Elena,
Arthur
she gave
stared
him
at
wings.
it.
The
And she
sound
gave
seemed
us
to
a chance
echo
to
in the
keep the name
vast
alive.
emptiness of the room.
Even if we don't
He
own
let
it
it ring
entirely.
twice before picking
Arthur
up.
covered his
thumb
face
sliding
with his
across the
hands.
glass.
The fear was
Arthur
still
Sterling,
there, lurking
he
beneath
said,
the
his voice
surface.
raspy from
The
disuse.
fear that one day
Mr. Sterling,
Elena would decide
Henderson's
they were no
voice
longer
was smooth,
useful.
professional.
The
fear
and
that
utterly
Vance
devoid of
Global would
warmth.
absorb them completely.
We need to discuss the
and
margin
sterling
call
name
on the
would
corporate
become a
loans.
footnote in history.
The value of the
It was a
collateral
constant
has dropped
anxiety,
significantly
a
following
shadow
the
that
Nexus
followed him
announcement.
home.
That
I
sat
know,
at the dinner table,
Arthur said, standing
that
up
woke him
and
at 3
walking
in
to
the
the
window.
window. The
What
garden
happens
looked
when she gets
overgrown.
bored?
The staff
Arthur
hadn't
asked,
been there
his
in
voice
weeks.
muffled by his hands.
I'm working on a restructuring
What happens
plan.
when she decides to
The
sell
board
the
is no longer
assets?
willing to wait
We
for
are
a
at her
plan.
mercy.
Then we
Henderson
work,
replied,
Margaret said
the
firmly.
liquidity crisis
We prove
is
our
critical.
worth. We
Not
need
as
immediate
owners, but as
injection of
leaders.
capital to cover
We
the
show her that we
outstanding
know
debts.
this business better than
40
anyone.
million by the end
We
of
earn
the
our
week.
place.
Arthur
looked
looked
up
up
at
at
her.
her. He
The
saw
wood
the
was
steel
cold
in her
under his
eyes
palm.
that he had always admired.
40 million? She was
That's
right.
impossible in
They
that
could not
time
retreat.
frame. They could
Not
not
without
hide.
liquidating major
The decline of their
assets.
absolute power
Then
was
liquidate,
inevitable,
Henderson
but the
said
decline of
simply.
their relevance
The personal
was a choice.
holdings.
You
The
think
art
she'll let
collection.
us?
Arthur
The vacation
asked.
properties.
She saved the
And
company,
the primary
Margaret
residence.
said.
The
She
mansion
didn't
holds
liquidate it.
significant equity.
She kept Lucas.
It would cover the
She
deficit.
wants this to work.
Arthur closed
But
his
she
eyes.
won't tolerate
The
incompetence.
mansion. The
Not
place where he
anymore.
had built his life.
Arthur nodded slowly.
The place where he had brought
He closed
Elena.
the blue report.
The place where he had
The sound
thrown
of
her
the
out.
cover shutting
Sell the
echoed
house,
in the quiet
he whispered.
room.
That's
Then
my
we
home.
adapt.
It's an asset, Mr. Sterling, and we work. And right now, it will be hard. The only one large enough to save the company. The staff knows. If you don't authorize the sale, we will be forced to initiate bankruptcy proceedings. Arthur said, standing up. You know what that means? He straightened his tie. A reflex of his old self. Potential litigation regarding the misappropriation. Sterling knows how to survive. The even in the shadow of air, heavy and final. He walked to the door. Arthur looked at his reflection. The office outside was dim. He looked older, the staff having left shadows under his eyes deep. But tomorrow they would be back. He saw the man Elena the work would begin about. Not the work of expansion, pride over but the work of preservation. Give me the day, the work of humility. I'll contact the real estate agent. The night air was End of business today. Arthur looked up at the Vance Global Tower. Don't make us come to you. The line went taller than their own building. Arthur lowered the phone. It was a monument. The silence returned, but now it felt a pang of jealousy. He walked out of the living room, but he also felt a strange sense of relief. His footsteps echoed on the burden of keeping the ship afloat, step sounding like a gavel strike. He was no longer the captain steering, trailing his hand along the wall. He was the navigator. The plaster was Lucas invited us to dinner. He had chosen this stone as they walked to their car. He had wanted it to last forever. At their new place. Now it was just inventory. Arthur hesitated. He entered the dining room. The idea of sitting at their table was still set from that night. Guests. The cold plates had been cleared by him days ago, but he looked at Margaret, seeing the hope in her eyes. He could see Elena sitting there. She wanted the family wrapped around a mug, even if the structure had changed. For understanding. Will Elena be there? Where Henderson's voice now echoed in his head. It's their home, cold and demanding. Of course she will be. Then Arthur opened the car door. The image. Then we will go. The image was consuming him. But we will not go as beggars. He pulled out the chair. We will go as family. The family creaked. Margaret repeated. He sat down and put his head in his hands. It felt different now. The shame was less about bloodlines and more pressing on his lungs. Yes, he had traded her dignity for this house. As the car drove away, now the house was being taken anyway. Arthur looked out the window one last time. He had lost everything. The lights of the building seemed to pulse. He stood up and wondered if Elena was there. The hallway was dark. He wondered if she felt triumph. He pushed open the door to the master bedroom. He hoped she felt only responsibility. The bed was made, the pillows fluffed, because if she felt triumph, empty. She was no better than the closet. Her side was passed by in a blur of lights and shadows. He ran inside the car. The silence returned, but she had less space for herself. They had accepted the reality. The decline of the old empire was just air. The rise of the window and looked out over the estate, and they were along for the grounds were vast. Arthur closed his eyes, and they were gone. He was just the caretaker he had been, waiting for the new owners before the expectations. He went to his study. He missed him. The computer was still on. This new path would bring him back. The screensaver bouncing silently. He said quietly. He sat in the leather chair and woke. Did we make a mistake? He opened his email. At the beginning, searched for the contact. Margaret looked out the window. Sterling Estates Realty. The rain had started again. He hovered the cursor over the compose button. Yes, his hand shook simply. To send this email was to admit mistakes defeat. Are only fatal. It was to tell the world that Arthur Sterling could not keep his castle. He watched the rain. It was to confirm that he was no longer the car turned the corner, but the alternative was the flow of traffic. The alternative was Sterling name was still on the building. He typed the subject line, but the power behind it listing inquiry primary. The anxiety of the decline was still there. His fingers hovered over the keys of their lives. He thought about it. It was no longer a panic. Where was she living now? It was a motivation. A small apartment. They had fallen. A rented room. Now they had to learn how to stand in a new world. And she had survived. A world where money wasn't the only currency. He was here with everything was earned, he had lost and inherited. The irony was bitter they disowned held the keys to their future. He typed the body of the email. But please initiate the sale process. And for now, that had to be enough. Full market value. The storm had passed. Discretion preferred, the landscape was changed forever. He read it over. Have to navigate the new terrain carefully. So one step at a time. A lifetime of humble decisions at a walls themselves were holding. He thought about the Christmas parties. Arthur Sterling sat in his office. The quiet mornings, the blue report still on his desk. The laughter that used to. But now it was accompanied by a stack. It was all going to belong to strangers. He had tried to find an alternative. People who would walk through the halls. He had tried to find a way to dilute Elena's control. They would just see the marble in another partner. To prove they wouldn't know about the Sterlings could stand out more than one pillar. They wouldn't know about the man who sold his soul to keep the walls standing. Margaret entered the office without knocking. The sound of the message had never broken despite the change, barely audible. But it sounded like she held a tablet in her hand. He leaned back in the chair. The meeting with Chase Bank is the house was on the market. The clock was ticking. Placing the tablet. He imagined the agents coming tomorrow. But Arthur, I've spoken to their liaison. The signs on the lawn. For hesitant is better than no. The words burned in his mind. Arthur replied. He stood up and walked to the safe. The headache had been a constant companion and took out the jewelry box. We need the liquidity for the modular upgrade. It was heavy, valuable. If we can fund that independently, too, we reduce our reliance on Vance Global. He remembered Elena's dignity. Margaret closed the box and put it in his briefcase. The view was the same as always, but the perspective had shifted. This was the only thing they know about the debt truly his, not the bank's. Everyone knows. He walked back downstairs. Vance Global owns the majority. The sun was higher now. The light harsh and unforgiving. No bank will touch us. It illuminated the dust motes dancing in the air. We aren't searching for a partner. He walked to the front door. We're searching for permission. Opened it. Arthur stood up. The air outside was pacing the room. He stepped onto the porch. I built this company. The same porch where Elena had stood. I won't be reduced to look down at the gravel. A former employee could almost see the imprint of my own suitcase wheels. She is not a former employee.
Margaret
He wondered
said
if she
sharply,
hated him,
turning to face
He
him.
hoped she didn't. And she is not asking for permission. He deserved the hate. He is exercising her rights
too good
as the
for
majority
it.
stakeholder. A car drove past
There
on
is
the
a
road
difference.
outside. Arthur stopped pacing.
A family
He looked
going
at his
somewhere.
wife, seeing
They didn't
the
know who he
fatigue in her
was.
eyes that matched
They didn't
his
know
own.
that the man
I need to
standing
know
on
if
the
there's
porch
any
was
way out.
losing everything.
Any other investor.
He was just a man in
Any
a wrinkled
rumor of
suit
someone else
standing in
looking
front
to
of a
buy
big
in.
house.
There are
That was all he
rumors,
was now,
Margaret admitted,
not a
lowering her
billionaire.
voice. Not a titan.
The market is buzzing
Just
about
a man
the mystery
who made a
heir
mistake.
of Vance Global.
He went back inside
They say she's
and locked the
ruthless.
door. They say
The
she's
sound of the
buying
lock
up
was
distressed
final.
assets across
He walked
the city.
into the living room
Some say
and
she's
sat on
clearing
the
the board
again.
for a monopoly.
He waited for the phone
Arthur
to
scoffed.
ring.
He knew
Let
it
them
would.
talk.
The agents.
Rumors are smoke.
The press.
I need fire.
The board.
I need
The
capital.
vultures were circling.
The next morning.
But for now,
the
he
meeting
sat
at
in the
Chase
quiet.
Bank was held
He
in a
closed his
small
eyes.
conference room.
He
far.
thought about the topic
smaller
of the
than
next
the grand
chapter of
halls
his
Arthur
life.
was used to.
It wasn't about
the bankers were
acquisition
polite,
anymore.
but their
It was
eyes
about
were
survival.
guarded.
They
It was
shuffled
about
papers,
redemption.
avoided
But
direct
he knew
eye
he
contact,
couldn't by
and
redemption.
spoke in circles.
He couldn't sell assets
Arthur felt
to get
the
it back.
rejection building.
He had to
before
earn
a
it.
single word was
And he didn't
spoken.
know if he had enough
Mr.
time
Sterling,
left to try.
the lead banker,
The phone
Mr.
rang.
Reynolds began.
He looked at it,
steepling his
He let it
fingers.
ring.
He
We
wasn't
haven't
ready
reviewed
to
your
speak
proposal
yet.
for the
He
secondary
needed one
line
more
of
minute
credit.
of silence.
It's ambitious.
One more minute to
It's
say
necessary,
goodbye to the
Arthur
man he
corrected.
used to be.
The
The
upgrade
man
will
who thought
increase
money was
efficiency
everything.
by 30%.
The man who was single
It's a
call.
solid
He
investment.
knew who they were. We don't doubt
Reporters,
the viability of the
competitors,
project.
Reynolds
Pitying
said
friends.
smoothly.
They all
doubt
wanted
the
a collateral.
collateral.
They all
Given the
wanted to
current debt
confirm the
structure with
rumor
Vance
that was
Global,
already
any
spreading
new
like
lending would be
wildfire through
subordinate
the
to their
financial
claims.
district. In
He
the
stood
event
up
of
and
default,
walked to the
they
window,
get paid first.
peering through a gap
We
in
get
the
nothing.
curtains.
We won't
A black
default.
van was parked
Arthur
across the
said,
street,
his voice rising
a
slightly.
satellite dish was
We have
being
a plan.
erected on its roof.
Plans change.
They were already
Reynolds
here.
countered.
The vultures
And
had
market
smelled the
shift.
blood before the
Our
body
risk
was
assessment
even
team
cold.
has flagged your
He
account
turned on the
as high
television
risk
in the corner
due to the
The
concentration
financial
of
news
ownership.
channel was already
Unless
running
Vance
the
Global
story.
provides a guarantee,
A graphic filled the
we
screen.
cannot proceed.
Sterling Estate
Arthur felt the
liquidation.
blood drain from
Below
his
it,
face.
a ticker tape
Guarantee?
scrolled with updates
You want
on
Elena
Sterling
Vance
Industries
to guarantee
stock
our
price,
loan,
which was
We want the
plummeting in
primary
real time.
stakeholder to signal
The anchor's
confidence,
voice was smooth,
Reynolds said.
professional.
Without
but the words
that,
were
our
brutal.
hands are tied.
Sources confirmed
Arthur
that
stood
Arthur
up,
Sterling
his chair
has listed his
scraping
primary
loudly against
residence
the
for
floor.
immediate sale.
This is absurd.
Speculation
You're telling me I
suggests
can't
this
borrow
is a
money
move
against
to
my
cover
own
significant
because
liquidity
another company
shortages
owns too much
within
of my
Sterling
debt.
Industries.
I'm telling you,
The mansion,
Reynolds
valued
said,
at over
remaining
$30
seated,
million,
his voice calm and unyielding,
is expected to go
that
to
the
auction
market has
due to high
consolidated.
interest from
There is
institutional
only one
investors.
player with the capital to
Arthur
back
turned
you
the
now,
volume down,
and that
but he
player
couldn't
is
turn
Vance
off
Global.
the image.
Arthur
There was
left
a
the
photo
bank
of the house
without saying
saying
goodbye. His
The
house,
city air was
the
cold,
place where he had
biting
raised
through
his
coat,
children, where
Margaret
he had
was
hosted
waiting in the
dinners,
car,
where he had
She
told
saw his
Elena
face
to leave.
and knew the answer.
Now it
before
was a
he spoke.
commodity.
No,
a line item
Arthur
on a
said,
balance
getting
sheet.
into the back seat.
He felt a wave
He
of
slammed the
nausea
door,
rise in his
the
throat.
sound echoing in
He
the
walked to the
enclosed
bar
space.
and poured a drink.
They want her
But
signature.
his hand shook so
They want her
violently
blessing.
he spilled half
Margaret
of it on the
nodded
counter.
slowly.
He wiped
So
it
there
away
is no
with
one
his
else.
sleeve, not
No
caring
one,
about the stain.
Arthur whispered.
He felt
leaning
stripped
back
naked.
against the leather
The
seat.
wealth he had used
He
as
closed
armor
his
was
eyes.
gone.
The
And
irony
without it,
was
he
suffocating.
was just a man who
They had
made
disowned
terrible
her for being
choices.
inadequate.
He walked through
They
the
had
house
cast her
room
out
by
for
room.
lacking the
The
status. to
silence was
support
no
their
longer
legacy.
empty. And
It was
now their
accusatory.
legacy existed solely
Every portrait
because
on
she
the wall
allowed it.
seemed to watch him
She
with
was the air they
judgment.
breathed.
Every
the ground
piece
they
of
stood
furniture
on.
seemed to
The
whisper
girl they
about
called a
its impending
distraction was
sale.
the only
He
thing
stopped
keeping
in the
them
foyer.
from oblivion.
The chandelier
Where do we
above
go now?
sparkled,
Margaret
the
asked
morning
softly.
light.
He
Arthur
remembered the
opened
day
his
it was
eyes.
installed.
He looked out
Elena
the
had
window
chosen
at the
it.
passing city.
She had said it
He
looked
saw
like
the Vance
frozen
Global
starlight.
Tower in the distance.
He had agreed,
gleaming
mostly
like a
because she
beacon.
was smiling.
We go to them, he
Now
said.
it looked like ice.
We stopped fighting
Cold.
the current.
Hard.
We swim with
Unyielding. Will
He
Lucas
wondered
be
if
there?
the new owners would
Lucas
keep
is
it.
always there.
Probably
Arthur
not.
said.
They would
He's
want
the
something
bridge.
newer.
If we want to
Something
cross
that didn't
this
carry the
chasm,
scent
we
of
have
his
to walk
disgrace.
over him. Across
The drive
city,
to the watch
in the
shop was
modest
silent.
office of
The
Sterling
neighborhood
and
was
Associates,
familiar.
The
But
atmosphere
it felt
was
different
different
now.
The
Before,
air hummed
it
with
was
the
a place
quiet
they
energy
avoided,
of work, a symbol of
Elena
Lucas's
sat at her
rebellion.
desk.
Her
Now it
screen
was the
displaying
command
the
center
same
of their
news feed
salvation.
Arthur was watching.
The shop was modest.
But her expression
the sign
was not one of
hand-painted.
shame.
The windows
It
filled
was
with
one of
clocks
calculation.
all shapes and sizes.
She took a sip of her coffee.
It was humble, her eyes
scanning
real.
the details of
Arthur
the listing.
stepped out of the car.
The price was
and
too
looked
low.
at the building.
The bank
He
was
felt a
forcing
surge
a
of
fire
shame,
sale.
hot and
They
prickly.
wanted quick cash.
He was about
not
to ask
fair
for
value.
help from the people
Sarah
he had
walked
tried
by
to
her
destroy.
desk and paused.
He adjusted
looking
his
at
tie,
Elena's screen.
a futile attempt
Did
to
you see
armor
this?
himself, she asked,
Margaret
lowering
touched
her
his
voice.
arm.
Arthur
Leave the
strode
pride
at
at
the
the
door,
door,
Arthur.
It's going to
Just
auction.
for today.
Elena
He
nodded. They
not
walked
looking
to the
away
door.
from the data.
The bell chimed as
saw.
they entered.
It's huge.
The smell of
Sarah
oil
said,
and would
shaking
welcome
her
them.
head.
Lucas
I heard
was
he's
at
in
the
deep
workbench.
trouble.
A loop
The
in his
Nexus
eye.
deal blew up,
working on a delicate
board is
mechanism.
circling.
The
Elena
market
stood
corrects,
nearby,
Elena said
reviewing a
softly.
tablet.
Sometimes
They both looked up
painfully
as the Sterlings
Sarah
entered.
hesitated. For a moment,
Are you okay?
no one spoke. I know. The tension
I know
was
you
palpable.
used to be.
A physical
I'm
weight
fine,
in
Sarah,
the small room.
Elena said, finally
Lucas
looking
removed
up.
the loop. Her gaze
Standing
was
up
steady,
slowly.
devoid
He
of the
didn't
pain
smile,
that
but he
used
didn't
to define
frown.
her. He waited.
That life is over.
Father, this is
Mother,
just news.
Lucas said.
Sarah
His
nodded,
voice was neutral.
sensing the boundary,
Lucas,
and walked away.
Arthur replied.
Elena turned
Looked
back
at
to her
Elena.
screen. Ms. Vance.
She minimized the news
Mr.
window
Sterling
and
opened
Elena
a secure
said.
browser.
She didn't offer
She
a
had been
hand.
watching Sterling
She didn't
Industries
offer a
for
seat.
months. She waited for them to state their
management.
business. She had seen the risky investments. He felt small in decline. The power dynamic had shifted
her own
so
investments.
completely it was disorienting.
The one she had started with her bonus and her
we had a
salary
meeting with Chase
had
Bank
grown
today.
steadily.
Elena
She wasn't
nodded
a billionaire
slightly.
yet.
I
but she
heard.
had capital.
They refused
And she
the
had
loan.
partners, Arthur
People
said.
who believed
The
in
words
her
difficult
analysis,
to force
not
out.
Her name. They said they
opened
need
a
a
file
guarantee
labeled
from
Project
Global.
Phoenix.
Elena
It was a place
planned
the
she had
tablet on the
drafted weeks
counter,
ago.
just
She
in
crossed her
case.
arms. She had
And
never
you
hoped
want me
it
to
would
provide
come to
it.
this. We need
She
the
had
capital
never
for
wanted
the
Arthur
upgrade,
to fail,
Arthur said. But he had
The
failed.
modular plan
And the
Lucas
house.
suggested.
The house was
It
more
works,
than just bricks.
but we can't
It
fund
was
it
a
without
symbol.
access to
And
credit.
symbols could be reclaimed.
Elena looked at Lucas.
She typed a message
Did you know
to
about
her
this?
financial advisor.
I suspected.
Initiate the
Lucas
bidding
said.
protocol. I told you they
Anonymous
would try to
entity.
find a way around.
Maximum
The
cap
market is
adjusted
tight.
to market value.
Elena turned her
She hit
gaze
send.
back to Arthur.
The message flew
Why should
across
I?
the digital
He
network.
tried to cut us off.
Hidden behind layers
He tried
of
to starve
encryption
us.
and shell
He
companies.
called me a liability.
She wasn't doing
Arthur
this for
flinched.
revenge.
The truth
She
of her
told
words
herself
was
that
a
every
physical
night.
blow.
She
I
was
was
doing
wrong,
it for
he said.
stability.
The admission
The house
hung
was
in the
undervalued,
air.
heavy and
It
raw.
was a good asset.
I judged you
It
by
made
standards
business
that
sense.
no longer apply.
But deep down,
I
in the
valued
quiet
money over
corner of
merit.
her heart where she
I
kept
see
the
that
memories
now.
she couldn't delete.
And
Elena
she knew
pressed.
there was more to it.
Is this just
She
about
wanted
survival?
to ensure the house was
or is it
treated
about
with
change?
respect.
It's about
She wanted
survival.
to ensure that the
Arthur
place where
admitted.
she had been humiliated was not
I want it to
turned
be about
into a
change.
casino or a hotel.
I don't want to lose the company.
She wanted to own the narrative.
I don't want to lose my
Back
son.
at the mansion,
Elena studied
Arthur
him.
received a call
She
from
looked.
his lawyer.
Inside
He
the
answered
Sterling
this time,
residence, needing
Arthur
to know
Sterling
the
was
details
tying
of the
his tie in
humiliation.
front of the mirror.
The auction is set
His
for next
reflection
Friday.
looked back at
The
him,
lawyer said.
stark and
Public
unyielding.
bidding.
He
Open
adjusted
house
the
starts
knot,
tomorrow.
pulling it
People
tight
will be walking
until it
through.
restricted
Arthur.
his breathing
You
slightly.
need to vacate the
It felt
premises by
appropriate.
Thursday. Constriction.
Vacate.
That was
Arthur
what today was
repeated,
about.
the word sounding
Margaret
foreign.
entered the room.
Where am I
holding
supposed
his
to
jacket?
go?
That's
You
not
don't
my
have to
department.
do this, the
she
lawyer
said
said,
softly.
his voice impersonal.
You could claim illness.
My job is to
Let me
maximize
represent
the
the
return
family.
for the creditors.
Arthur turned to face
Having
her.
you there complicates
No.
the viewing.
If I hide, I admit
Potential
defeat.
buyers want to
If I
envision
show up,
themselves
I admit
in the
change.
space, not
There is
you.
a difference.
Arthur hung up.
I will be there.
He looked around the
I will
room.
sit in the seat they
He had to
assigned
leave.
me.
And
He
I
had to
will
pack
listen.
what was left of his
Arthur,
life into boxes,
Margaret said,
and
stepping
find a
closer.
place to sleep.
Don't fight her.
He was being evicted
Not today.
from his own home,
Not
by
in
the
front
bank.
of the shareholders.
He walked to the window again.
If you fight, you lose.
The van across the
If you
street
collaborate,
now had a
you
reporter
survive.
standing outside
I know,
the gate.
Arthur
speaking
said,
into
taking
a
the
microphone.
He
They were
slipped his
filming the
arms into
driveway,
the sleeves,
filming his
I just
failure.
hope she remembers
He pulled
that
the
I built
curtains
the walls
shut,
she is now
plunging
living
the
in.
room into darkness.
She knows, Margaret
He sat
said,
on the sofa,
but
and
she's
put his head in
renovating
his
the
hands.
house. He
Let
was
her.
a ghost in his own
They
house.
arrived at the tower
The next
separately.
day, the open
A
house
deliberate
began.
choice to maintain
Arthur had
professional
moved into the guest
boundaries.
cottage on the
Elena
edge of the
and
property,
Lucas entered through the
a
main
small
lobby.
structure meant for
The
staff.
security guards nodded
It was cold and
respectfully.
sparse. Their badges
He watched
updated
from the
with
small
new
window
Vance
as
Global
cars
logos.
lined up outside
The
the main
elevator
house.
ride to the boardroom
Luxury
floor was
sedans.
swift.
SUVs.
When the doors opened,
People stepped
the hallway
out,
was lined
dressed
with
in
assistants
expensive
and
clothes,
junior
holding
executives.
brochures.
They
They
whispered
walked
as
through
Elena
his home
passed,
like it
their
was a
eyes
museum.
wide.
She
She
touched
didn't
his
look at them.
walls. She
They
walked
opened
with a
his
steady
drawers.
pace. He
Her
saw a
heels
woman
clicking
measure
on
the
the
width
marble.
of the dining room
Lucas
with a
walked
tape
beside
measure.
her, not behind.
He saw a man kick
He was
the
her partner,
floorboards to test
not her
their
assistant.
solidity.
They were
Inside the
scavengers.
antechamber to the
He
boardroom,
wanted to go out there.
Arthur and
He wanted to
Margaret
scream
were
at them
already
to
waiting.
leave.
Arthur
But he
stood by
couldn't.
the window.
He had signed the
looking out at the
papers.
gray sky.
He was powerless.
Margaret sat on a
He
bench.
watched a group of
reviewing a
investors
tablet.
walk onto the
When
terrace.
Elena and Lucas
They
entered,
pointed at the
Arthur
garden,
turned, discussing
the air in the
landscaping
room
costs.
shifted.
The
They
history
didn't see the
between them,
memories,
the rejection,
They saw the
pain,
maintenance
the
fees.
reconciliation.
Arthur turned away
hung
from
in
the
the
window.
silence. He couldn't
Ms.
watch
Vance,
anymore.
Arthur said,
He sat on
nodding
the small
formally.
cot in the cottage
Mr. Sterling,
and listened to the
Elena
murmur
replied.
of voices
Ready,
outside. As I'll
They
ever
sounded
be,
like bees
Arthur said.
swarming around a hive.
He looked at Lucas.
Among the crowd
"You
of
look well,
investors
son.
was a woman
You too, Dad,"
representing
Lucas
a
said.
holding company.
He wanted to say
She
more,
wore a
to
simple
bridge
gray
the gap,
suit and
but
sunglasses.
the moment demanded protocol.
She didn't speak to the
double
other
doors
buyers.
to the boardroom
She
were
walked
opened
through
by
the
an
house
assistant.
silently.
The
Taking
board is
notes on a
seated,
tablet.
the assistant announced.
She stopped in the master
Elena
bedroom.
took a breath. She ran her
This was
hand over the empty
point of
closet
no
shelves.
return.
She
She
looked
stopped
at
in the
Lucas,
dining room,
and he gave her a
She
small,
looked at the spot where
encouraging
Elena
nod.
used to sit.
She stepped
The
forward.
representative smiled
Arthur followed
faintly,
a step behind,
then turned and left.
Margaret followed him.
She walked to a
They
black
entered
car
the room
waiting
together.
at the gate.
The boardroom
She got
was
in
vast.
and made a call.
The table long
The property
and
is
polished to a mirror shine.
Structural integrity
Around
is
it sat
high.
the shareholders,
Emotional
the external
value is
advisors,
significant.
and the senior management.
Recommend aggressive bid.
20 pairs of
Understood.
eyes turned to the door.
The voice on the other end
The murmur
said.
of conversation
It was Elena's
died
voice.
instantly.
Everyone knew
the
the
secure
rumors.
line from her office.
Everyone knew the Vance
Keep the
Global
identity
acquisition
sealed
was
until the
final.
gavel drops.
But seeing her walk
Will
in
do,
alongside the
representative
Sterlings
said.
made it real.
The car drove away.
Elena walked
merging
to the
into
head
the
of the
traffic.
table.
Arthur
The seat there
watched
was
it
empty.
leave from the cottage
It had been
window.
Arthur's seat.
He
for
didn't know
30
who it
years.
was.
He
Today,
didn't know
it
that
belonged
the
to
woman
the
in the
majority
gray suit
stakeholder.
worked for the woman.
She
he had
pulled out the
thrown
chair and sat down.
He only knew that the
She
noose
placed her
was
folder
tightening.
on the table.
The auction was
Lucas
3 days
took the
away.
seat to her right.
The press was camped
Arthur took
on
the
lawn.
seat to her left.
The bank was
The
calling
symbolism
every hour,
was not lost
and
on
he was
anyone.
alone in a small
The old
cottage
guard
on
was
the
now
edge of the
flanking the
empire
new
he had
power.
lost.
Arthur sat
That
down
night,
slowly.
the wind
He
picked
felt
up,
the eyes of the
rattling
board on
the
him.
thin windows
He
of the
expected
cottage.
pity.
Arthur
He
lay on the
expected
cot,
scorn.
staring
Instead,
at the ceiling.
he saw curiosity.
He thought about the auction.
They were waiting to see
He
how
thought
he
about
would
the
react.
bidders.
Would
He
he
would buy
sulk?
it.
Would
A
he
rival?
argue?
A
He
foreign
straightened his
investor?
spine. A developer
give
who would
them
tear
the
it down.
satisfaction of
He
seeing
hoped
him
someone
break.
would love it.
He
Elena
hoped
opened
someone
her
would treat
folder.
it better than
Good
he had,
morning, she said.
He hoped Elena
Her
never
voice
saw it
was
sold.
clear,
He hoped
projecting
she
to
was
the
back
back
of the
away,
room without
living
effort.
a life where his
Thank you
name
for being
didn't
here.
exist. We have a
He
lot
didn't
of
know
work
she
to
was
do.
the one holding
She
the
began
pen
to
that would
speak,
sign the deed.
outlining the roadmap.
He didn't know
for
that the
next
circle was
quarter.
closing.
She spoke
He
of
closed his
efficiency,
eyes and
of
tried to sleep,
modernization,
but the
of
sound of
ethical
the
labor
wind
practices.
sounded like whispers.
She didn't mention
Whispers
the
of his
past.
name.
She didn't
Whispers
mention
of
the
his
debt.
shame.
She
The
focused
auction
on
was
the
coming.
future. And
As
with
she
it,
spoke,
the
Lucas
end of
watched
one
his
story
father.
and the beginning
Arthur
of
was
another.
listening.
The
He
circling
wasn't
in a
taking
tank,
notes aggressively,
waiting for the scent of
nor was
blood
he
to
staring
turn
out
into
the
a
window.
feast. He was
At the
listening.
front of the room,
Occasionally,
the
he
auctioneer
nodded.
stood
It
behind
was a small
podium of
gesture,
dark
but to
mahogany.
Lucas,
his
it
gavel
felt like a
resting
mountain
beside a
moving.
microphone.
Halfway
that would
through the
amplify his
presentation,
voice into
a
the
shareholder
lives of
raised his
everyone
hand.
watching.
Mr. Henderson, the same man who had questioned Elena months ago. Ms. Vance, he began. Regarding the supply chain restructuring, are we confident that the Sterling legacy suppliers can meet the new standards? Or will we need to look externally? Elena paused. She looked at Arthur. Mr. Sterling, she said, this falls under your oversight. What is your assessment? The room went silent. It was a test. She was giving him the floor. She was allowing him to lead within her framework. Arthur looked at her, surprised. He hadn't expected to be consulted publicly. He looked at the board, then back at Elena. The legacy suppliers are capable, Arthur said, his voice steady. But they need investment. The modular upgrade plan will allow them to meet the new standards without being replaced. I recommend we proceed with the internal upgrade. Elena nodded. Agreed. Mr. Sterling's team will lead the implementation. Lucas felt a surge of pride. It wasn't just about the business decision. It was about the respect. His father was being treated as an asset, not a liability. And Elena was treating him with dignity. The meeting continued for another hour. Decisions were made. Votes were cast. Every time Elena asked for input, Arthur provided it. Every time Arthur